Hey guys, tonight we step out of the noisy present and into a slow, ember-lit evening at the mouth of a Neanderthal cave. You can feel the days slipping away, the sky doing that bruised plum thing, the wind testing every fold of your cloak, and a low, patient glow from a hearth that has clearly seen more drama than you have this week. Your seat is a flattish slab that claims to be a chair. The rock will insist it's ergonomic the way a twig insists it's a spear. You probably won't survive this without a blanket and a snack, but the fire is friendly and the menu, as we'll see, is honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let me know where this little cave mouth finds you tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch closer to the light and let your eyes adjust to the color of comfort. Coals breathing, a rim of dry wood waiting its turn, the occasional flare when resin remembers its childhood. Your belly offers a diplomatic cough. A few heads turn and smile because everyone's stomach speaks that language. You've arrived just as the camp's most patient miracle is doing its evening work. Fire kept small but steady, not bonfire bragging, just a circle of heat that says, "I'll be here when the stars clock in." A low bundle of sticks lies beside the hearth like a polite dog. The keeper of the coals, tonight it's the short ant with impeccable eyebrows, leans in with a charred branch and nudges Embers into a neater geography. Mainstream fact to hold in your palm: Neanderthals didn't merely stumble on flames. At many sites we find hearths layered through time, ash, charcoal, reddened earth, evidence of repeated, controlled fires, used for warmth, light, hardening points, and of course, cooking. You can practically feel the habit of it in the way the group treats the glow. Not magic, not theater, just a household appliance that predates the concept of outlets. The smoke slides out on a learned path. This cave has airflow like an old instrument. Someone tested this spot long ago and moved stones until it drew sweetly. Your eyes sting for a second and then the draft finds its balance, lifting the smoke into the rising night like a messenger. Behind you, in the waning light, the slope wears the day's footprints, narrow tracks down to the stream, wide scuffs from where a big ungulate agreed to become future soup, a scattering of nutshells that looks exactly like a victory with crumbs. The menu begins to assemble itself in small, sensible moves. A long bone, beefy, probably a red deer's, gets rolled near the coals with the reverence of a future dessert. Someone taps it, listening for the note that says, "Marrow ready." Two hammerstones sit on an anvil stone the way napkins sit on a modern table. You can see the percussion scars where other bones surrendered their secrets. Joke 1. Your rock stool confesses it's actually just a rock with ambitions, but it's thrilled to host this dinner service. Across the hearth, a pair of muddy tubers, starchy, homely, perfect, have been slotted close to the heat where the ash is hot but polite. They hiss like shy snakes and then settle into a quiet steam. If you asked for a recipe, the camp would shrug. Recipe here means, turn it until the skin blisters, then wait. It's a technology of patience. Roasting detoxifies some wild roots, softens fibers, and turns dull starches into sugars your evening will understand. Your nose does the math before your head can. Sweet, earthy, edible. A small bundle of greens, someone grabbed wild onion or something that behaves like it, is knotted with bast fiber and set to wilt on a hot stone. A hazelnut cracks in a practiced hand, the retoucher tool, bone or antler, resting nearby for later, when spear points need their edges kissed back into usefulness. The toolkit that looks like rocks and sticks, to a distracted eye turns into quiet cutlery once you notice used polish on edges, the silky sheen that marks a favorite tool. Joke 2. Our most advanced utensil tonight is a stick with tenure. The social choreography clicks into place almost without words. You scoot over instinctively when an elder drops a bundle by the glow. A child is appointed official rotator of tubers, having passed the crucial test of remember to turn both. The one with the scarred knuckles, that's your marrow specialist, does a little performance with the hammerstones. Line up the long bone, find the seam, a single sharp whack, and then that slow ooze of rich marrow that makes even the quietest watcher tilt forward. The marrow gets warmed in a cracked stone cup for a minute until it relaxes, then dipped with splinters and shared like a secret. You can feel why this meal works in every season. Fat for winter brains, starch for steady legs, greens to stop your joints from filing complaints in spring. If berries are in, the children arrive decorated and proud. If it's lean times, someone has a stash of dried meat that tastes like the memory of sun. Fire is the great editor. It softens, sweetens, sterilizes, and socializes. Food meets heat, and suddenly the conversation has a topic. Right about now your mind wanders to what counts as cooking. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal cooking was an everyday sophistication, regular roasting, basic stewing with hot stones, and habitual smoke curing, or a weather-driven convenience, done when wood was good and the wind behaved. Evidence shows charred plant remains, cooked starch granules on tools and teeth, and hearths that repeat like trustworthy punctuation. But disentangling always from often is hard when time has done such thorough housekeeping. A hand passes you a sliver of bark with something dark and glossy stuck to it. You sniff birch and a ghost of smoke. Quirky tidbit for your pouch: Neanderthals learned to make birch tar, a sticky, smoky glue, by heating bark in low-oxygen setups. Lumps have even turned up with tooth marks, as if someone chewed the tar to keep it pliable, which, yes, doubles as the Ice Age version of stress gum. You smile into the firelight. Tech and taste live closer together here than we often remember. The group's language tonight is half hum, half gesture. A tilt of the chin assigns a task. 2 taps on the stones say, wait. A small rhythm on a rib bone says, good. You add your own soft percussion with a stick, and nobody minds. The beat fits the embers. The cave mouth frames the dark like a painting hung to reassure the hearth that the world continues. Joke 3. Your stomach files a formal petition titled, more of that marrow, please, and the council of eyebrows approves unanimously. The hearth's position tells its own story, not deep inside, where smoke would sulk, and not fully outside, where wind would stage a coup. It's in the draft sweet spot, where mosquitoes regret their life choices and soot rises clean. Stones are banked like sleepy sentries. A charred log is angled so a single push buys 20 minutes of steady heat. This is a well-run kitchen by any name. Listen to the resource math. Wood is gathered by type: soft, quick stuff for flair; dense, tough pieces for a core that refuses to leave. Water sits in a folded skin bag, warmed by proximity so no one earns a cold surprise. Even the ash has a job. It will bank the coals later, tucked over like a blanket so tomorrow can start with a whisper instead of a plea. Your modern stove works harder. Theirs works wiser. A distant hyena yip pricks ears. The group's reaction is pure theater. Nobody panics. Everybody looks. The fire is fed just a little to remind the knight who owns the bistro. A few cooked bones, emptied of marrow and pride, are tossed into the midden downwind, far enough that scavengers won't rewrite the guest list. The knight decides it has better places to haunt. You grin. The cave grins back in the language of warm rock. It's ordinary, and quietly dazzling, this dinner. No plates, no recipes, no garnish. Just a circle of humans who understand timing, when to split, when to turn, when to blow, when to wait, when to pass the good bit to the small hands first. You lean back and feel your spine discover that caves invented ergonomics before chairs did, by convincing your muscles to copy the breathing of the fire. When the last tuber splits under your thumb and reveals its sweet, steaming heart, You stop pretending you're not hungry and accept your share. It tastes like work rewarded and weather forgiven. In a minute the ash banking will happen, coals tucked in for the night like red-eyed kittens. But for now you watch the sparks climb into a sky that has been receiving sparks for a very long time, and you understand why this simple room of heat and patience keeps getting rebuilt, over and over, wherever people decide to stay long enough to eat slowly. You let the fire finish its yawn and turn toward the evening's menu, which is less a list than a rhythm: fat, starch, crunch, bright. The marrow you watched ease out of that long bone is quietly puddling on a warmed flake of stone, gleaming like it has opinions about winter. Beside it, the tubers you tucked into the ash earlier begin to sweeten, blistering in a way that looks like trouble and tastes like forgiveness. Someone produces a palm of nuts. Hazel if this valley is kind, maybe pine kernels if high slopes were generous, and a twist of berries that survived the walk home without turning into modern art. It isn't a feast that poses for paintings. It's a meal designed by weather and patience. You join the choreography with a stick that thinks it's a spatula. A child announces with the solemnity of a magistrate that the first tuber is ready. They say this by pointing, squinting, and nodding like a tiny elder. You roll it out of the embers and tap the skin. It sloughs with a sigh, revealing the steam-slicked glow of cooked starch. You mash a thumbprint into the flesh, make a small pocket, and drip a bead of marrow into it. The pocket takes the fat like a secret it plans to keep. First taste: warm, slightly smoky, as if the hillside you walked today decided to apologize and do the dishes. Across the hearth, the nut station opens. A flat anvilstone, 2 hammerstones, and practiced hands that already know which way the shell wants to crack. You watch hazelnuts give up their tan sweaters to small, clean kernel hearts. If the shells try to be dramatic, the anvil's scars vote for restraint. Someone passes the pine kernels, tiny moons in a palm, a fat without fuss that melts into roasted root like it has been plotting this romance for 100,000 years. Joke 1. The cave's first charcuterie board turns out to be rock with bits, and it is, embarrassingly, perfect. You scoot closer, because the fire's voice is conversational now, small ticks of sap, a hush of air over coals, the clink of stone on stone. You make yourself useful, split a second bone, one tidy strike, you've learned, prop 2 root lumps where the ash stays hot but polite, and test a berry by the ancient safety protocol of smell first, then envy the child who gets 2. Berries are the bright on the plate, the thing that teaches your mouth to pay attention between fat and starch. In a world without vinaigrettes, sour sweet is a public service. The meal tells a story your body understands in grammar, not footnotes. Fat boosts the brain and keeps fingers warm. Starch spares protein and makes walking feel less like a negotiation. Nuts pack busy calories into small, portable good ideas. Berries deliver tiny lectures on vitamins that keep gums cheerful and joints less opinionated. You notice the rotation at work. In cold months, the long bones and sinew-rich cuts get top billing, with tubers doing steady supporting roles. In warm weeks, the plant chorus gets louder, and the fats slide into sauces and smears rather than headlines. It's seasonal eating because season is your landlord. Mainstream fact to hold steady in the lamplight: Neanderthals weren't just meat machines. Alongside the many cut-marked animal bones and marrow-smashed shafts, researchers have found plant microremains, starch granules and phytoliths, trapped in Neanderthal dental calculus, some of them thermally altered, plus charred plant fragments and hearth layers and living floors. Combined with the stable isotope picture that shows a high trophic level from frequent big game hunting, you get a diet that could swing fat forward yet still fold in plants as habit, especially roasted roots, nuts, and seasonal fruits. Your mouth, being practical, already knew this. A woman with a scar like a river delta on her wrist does the marrow trick you're going to copy forever. She stirs a thumb of marrow with a pinch of crushed wild onion and a grain or two of salt-tasting ash taken from a particular corner of the hearth where the wood has burned clean. She smears it across a split tuber. You swear a choir you can't see tunes up in the back of the cave. Quirky tidbit for your collection. Adding a speck of fine ash isn't simply seasoning theater. Tiny amounts can neutralize bitterness in some wild roots and mimic the minerally snap your tongue votes for, a camp trick that future kitchens will reinvent with alkaline this and bicarbonate that. The rule is easy: pinch, don't pour. The ant with the eyebrows will flick your ear if you forget. You pay attention to portions, because this camp has manners. Elders get the first marrow drips, it's winter insurance. Kids get the blushy middles of tubers, soft enough not to argue with baby teeth. Hunters who carried heavy today get seconds without speeches. The one who slipped and invented mud skating gets an extra nut because comedy deserves payment. The portioning isn't charity, it's logistics with a smile. Dinner is how you smooth the day's edges so tomorrow can start without debts. You wonder aloud about recipes, and the camp answers with techniques instead of measurements. If the tuber bleeds white sap, roast longer and peel thicker. If acorns show up on the menu, crack them, leach the bitter out in a bark basket in running water, then roast until they confess they were meant to be porridge. If the marrow tastes too shy, warm it in a stone cup and stir with a twig that remembers wild onion. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals went as far as stone-boiling stews, dropping fire-heated rocks into bark or skin containers to simmer greens and bones, or kept to roasting, smoking, and hot stone warming. The archaeological record gives you hearths, burned stones, fat-polished tools, and a few teasing hints. Your bowl tonight is the practical middle. Roast what wants roast, warm what wants warm. Nuts go last, partly because dessert, partly because they invite talk. Cracking is social music. You learn the two-tap rhythm that opens a hazel cleanly without pulverizing it into remorse. When your first one explodes theatrically and tries to shatter across 3 counties, the elder beside you deadpans. Generous sharing. Joke 2. You propose opening a fine dining cave called The Midden, and promise rock seating and ash service. The child rotator promotes you to bone cracker instead. Someone holds a twig over the fire not for food but for the smoke itself. A little pest policy for the wrists and ankles. The hearth has been placed in that draft sweet spot you appreciated earlier, so the smoke schemes you rather than blinds you, persuading mosquitoes to attend a different bistro. You can see why nights like this bred loyalty to specific caves. The right airline for smoke, the right view for vigilance, a floor that drains rain sensibly. A kitchen is a map disguised as a room. You test a berry that's halfway to wine and learn the group's other safety protocol. Watch the birds. If they linger on a bush, good sign. If they pick and spit, not tonight. There's cautious wisdom in stealing from beaks that have tried everything once. On fat lucky nights someone will mash berry into marrow and invent sauce without telling the future it did. You call it cave gas streak in your head and swear you won't, under any circumstance, say that out loud. As for tableware, you improvise. A rib becomes a spoon, a flake becomes a knife, a bark curl becomes a bowl that is too beautiful to be legal in your century. The best plates are hands, the best napkins are grass. The best etiquette is passing without making a speech about how generous you are. You discover that when food is simple, conversation has room. The talk stays low, full of hums, head tilts, and the occasional drumstick tap that means more here. Balanced eating isn't a philosophy tonight. It's a camp math your stomach learned in an hour. After the marrow pockets and 2 handfuls of nutty crunch, you find yourself slower, warmer, less interested in inventing problems. The cave seems to widen. The stars at the mouth are closer. The air says thank you without words. You watch how people finish. A berry smear offered to a toddler's mouth. A last tuber turned into ash-banked breakfast. The nutshells brushed into a neat, downwind line that tells hyenas. Dinner is concluded. Kindly leave your reviews elsewhere. Historians still argue whether. Regional menus shifted wildly, coastlines bringing shellfish and seaweed, forests stressing mushrooms and nuts, steppes doubling down on marrow, or whether the core pattern you're tasting held across landscapes, fat plus starch plus crunch plus bright, rearranged by season. The safe answer is both, local detail over a familiar backbone, which is exactly how your week of modern dinners works when you're honest. You end by doing the decent thing for tomorrow. A thin lid of ash goes over the coals. The ant with eyebrows arranges two sticks like the equals sign of do not touch. The last bone is cracked and the fat smear left on the anvil will season someone else's morning fire. Joke 3. You declare the berry smudge on your chin to be war paint, and the child rotator solemnly upgrades it to sleep stripes. When you lean back, the cave pays you the highest compliment it knows. It lets you feel full without noise. The menu didn't need poetry. It needed embers, timing, and a group that still remembers how to pass the good thing to small hands first. Your eyelids volunteer for guard duty and immediately fall asleep at their post. Somewhere outside, a hyena tells a joke about bones. Inside, the marrow remembers it used to be running and chooses, with considerable dignity, to be rest. You wake into the kind of morning that smells like damp stone and promise, and before the hearth remembers its day job you're already scanning the slope for signs. Finding dinner, here, is not a shopping trip and not yet farming. It's reading a book the land writes in footprints, fans of leaves, and the grammar of dung. You step into that book with the digging stick in your hand and yesterday's ash still on your cuffs, and the rock behind you keeps the fire's ember under its little blanket, purring like a pet you'll feed when you come home. You start with paths that aren't roads, thin, canted lines where hooves have taught the hill which way is easiest. They snake toward water, cut along a contour, merge like braid and then separate when someone stubborn insisted on their own opinion about gravity. Your feet fall in and the stride smooths. Off to the right, the bent grass tells you a red deer chose indecision there yesterday. Straight ahead, the ground keeps the dug commas of wild boar. Good news if you like tubers, because boar and roots share calendars. You don't chase the animals, you chase their habits. Joke 1. A flat rock tries to be dramatic by pretending to be a hoofprint, but the dung nearby informs you gently that it is merely a rock with ideas. Down by the stream you kneel and pinch the bank. Root fans splay under the mud like hands praying for patience. Some cattail rhizomes reveal their pale bellies when you wiggle them. A wild onion makes the air confess itself. A pignut, the little earth nut that hoards its sugar like a miserliness lesson, leaves a tiny mound that looks like a question mark. You score a ring with your digging stick, pry, and the soil says yes. Mainstream fact, folded into your pocket. Neanderthal sites across Europe and Western Asia preserve hearth layers, cut-marked bones, plant micro-remains in dental calculus, and you swear on tools that together paint a picture of broad-spectrum foraging, frequent big-game hunting paired with roasted roots, nuts, and seasonal fruits, all arranged by landscape knowledge rather than fields and fences. You don't plant, but you garden the wild in a way the wild respects. You take the fatter roots and leave the stringers to knit the bank back together. You shake soil back into the holes so the next rain doesn't write a gully there. You reseat the mat of reeds like a blanket. A sliver of root breaks off and stays. Come another season, the patch will remember you kindly as if you brought seeds, though what you really brought was restraint. You mark the place in your head, cave, slope, hawthorn with the bend, the log that looks like a sleeping ox, because maps live in ribs before they live in ink. Farther upslope, a massed tree grove waits for a better month. Acorns are bitter today, but you thumb two from the leaf litter anyway and pocket them as future homework. Crack, leach in the stream, roast until they turn into porridge that knows its own mind. A hazel branch shakes the way a dog does when it's about to sneeze. That means nuts later, that means a reason to return with hammerstones and patience. You are not circling at random. You're walking a seasonal loop your feet learned from mouths long before yours. Spring greens and eggs, summer berries and fish if the river's in the mood, autumn nuts and roots, winter fat and marrow, and always the steady alphabet of fire to make the grammar work. Your eyes do dung math the way your tongue did fat and starch math last night. Hard gray pellets. That herd has been gone. Shiny, warm, impatient. Do not go that way unless you mean to meet antlers without an appointment. Hyena chalk, crumbly, bone-rich, tells you the midden downwind is doing its gossiping job. Wolf scat with hair plug says the deer trail is news, not history. You adjust your route like you're editing a sentence. Above, a run of bird flight tilts toward a berry slope you note for another walk. Below, you keep wind in your face so your smell doesn't turn anyone's breakfast into a memo. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals shaped landscapes deliberately, with small burns to freshen tuber patches or selective cutting, or whether their influence was mostly the sum of careful foraging, letting restraint and movement do the gardening. They also debate the range and rhythm of travel. Some sites suggest short, repeated foraging radii around caves. Others hint at longer seasonal circuits and raw materials move 30 or more kilometers. Your walk today takes the cautious middle, a loop you can do before the Coles Miss Udata trail puzzle appears where three choices look equally plausible. You kneel, sniff a handful of torn sedge, and touch it to your lip for the bitter test. Learn the hard way, now done the easy way. The sedge says, "Not dinner," but the mud under it says, "Someone rooting past here at dawn." You choose the middle line and find what you were hoping for, a hollow where wild parsnip cousins crowd, their leaves giving the old carrot family lace work as a calling card. You handle them with respect. Some kin in this family have opinions about poison, and keep to the ones your aunt with the eyebrows approves. Joke 2, you nickname your digging stick Chef, and it accepts the promotion by refusing to splinter. You aren't alone, and that's the point. A pair team moves ahead and flags good patches by sticking a forked twig upright where a bundle would be silly to carry now. Another pair ranges wider for sign of deer, bringing back not just news but timing. Hoof holes that still hold water, recent, trampled bracken that has begun to unfold again, older. Children scout berry corners and practice the serious art of not eating the map symbols. When you pass a fresh badger dig, you look for the spill of bulbs nearby. The badger is a rude gardener who doesn't mind sharing. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. On some mornings, someone twists a cord of lime bast into a quick net bag and drops a knotted tag at the handle. 1 knot for roots, 2 for nuts, 3 for "Do not eat yet." It's not a writing system, it's memory with manners. The knots untie at camp, but the habit stays in fingers that will, tens of thousands of years from now, tie other kinds of information to other kinds of strings. You stop at a stone seam because where bedrock sweats in winter, greens wake early. Watercress sulks prettily in a trickle. You pinch only the tops, leaving roots to do next week. A willow offers bark if someone's head has a complaint later. You shave a curl the length of a thumbnail and tuck it into the basket under honor system. To the west the wind drags its sleeve across the ridge and brings goat. You say the word with your eyebrows and the group nods. Not a hunt today, but a reminder the herd uses this pass when the shadow length matches your arm. Calendar and elbows. If there's a tool lesson on a foraging day, it's the retoucher, a small bit of antler or bone that turns a tired flake back into a tooth. You set your digging stick aside, sit, and use the retoucher to press fine edge back onto last week's favorite scraper. The sound is small but confident. Tick tick, that use polish you love catching in slant light. Good edges mean roots part politely instead of arguing. Good edges also mean your hands go home with fewer stories to tell the fire. Historians still argue whether Fishing and shellfish were minor treats or reliable pillars in Neanderthal menus across regions. Coastal caves whisper one answer with limpet piles and charred fish bones. Inland sites whisper another with red deer calendars and marrow slick endles. They also debate the planning depth. Do transported stones and selective carcass parts prove logistical forays with staging points? Or just good luck organized well? Your present tense does what it always does. It hedges wisely, moves steadily, and leaves just enough for next week. By noon you've collected the day's truths, 6 fair roots, 3 that will be better tomorrow. So you reburied them, a handful of greens, a pocket chorus of nuts, and a mental note about a berry slope the birds adored. On the way back you rub a charcoal line on the bark of a leaning beech as, here, in future tense. No one scolds. The tree has seen worse signatures and this one washes with the next rain. Joke 3. You announce to the hill that your restaurant opens at dusk. Reservation policy. First come best coals. And a raven laughs like a landlord. Back at the cave the ember is where you left it, sulking politely under ash. You breathe it into courage, the way your aunt does. 2 short whispers, 1 long, then feed. A child holds out the net bag and tells you solemnly which knot means what. You thank the cord with a grin and it agrees to retire as lashings for the wood bundle. The division of labor is comforting. Some sets of feet make maps, others make heat, and everyone takes a turn at being the kind of useful that keeps bellies from becoming poets. Before the tuber touches warmth you do a last scan from the cave mouth. The goat pass keeps its promise to be empty. The deer trail has no new exclamation points. The smoke you send up threads the same draft as last night, a sign the day has behaved. Dinner will be familiar because the land was readable. You don't plow, plant, or fence. You listen, rotate, and return. That's not ignorance of farming. It's a different answer to the question, how do we eat again tomorrow? When the first root sighs its sweet breath and the stone cup of marrow warms to the color of gravity, you feel the strange luxury of finding instead of forcing. The ground gave what it could, you took what you should, and the route you left behind will be waiting, slightly different, perfectly itself, when your footsteps are ready to read it again. The ash banking trick will tuck the day's light into the small hours later. For now, you count what you carried without counting on it, and the cave settles around you like a parent who has learned not to wake a sleeping child with pride. You kneel where yesterday's heat still remembers the shape of your hands, and you treat the hearth like what it is out here, a small, stubborn animal that lives with you by mutual agreement. You don't shout at it or starve it. You feed, comb, carry, and coax. Everyone in camp has learned the same tone, the one you use for a creature that can bite but mostly purrs if you keep the rhythm right. First, you unmake the night. 2 fingers dig a little window through the ash blanket you tucked over the coals before bed. The gray gives way to that pulsing cherry you were hoping to see, a heartbeat that never learned arrogance. You lean close and exhale a gentle breath, never a gust, more like a lullaby that grew up, and the ember reddens like a blush. The ant with the excellent eyebrows passes you a twist of tinder, peeled curls of birch bark, a fluff of dried grass, a scrap of punkwood fretted by fungus until it wants to be cloud. You build the tiny teepee everyone builds, because some shapes became tradition long before anyone had the nerve to call them that. The sound is what calms you, a papery crackle from bark swirls waking up, a fizz from sap that has opinions, the soft sigh when kindling catches and decides to be flame and not rumor. You add sticks that remember resin, then longer pieces that burn like they've been practicing all week. When the first cupped hand of flame climbs and folds into itself, the cave changes temperature behind your sternum. You're not cold anymore, you're with something. You keep fire the way other people keep dogs. It has a sleeping corner and a little timeout, the ash blanket, and a travel trick. For travel you pack a slow heart, a chunk of punkwood or a cake of tinder fungus coddled in bark, dabbed with a breath of ash to tame the greed, nested in a bast fiber pouch that rides at a belt. It doesn't look like much, which is exactly why it works. A hand-sized ember can walk a day and a half if you treat it as a pet with tiny meals, touches of dry grass, a breath now and then, shade when the wind gets nosy. Joke 1. You introduce your ember to a child as our camp's very slow fox, and it earns its new name by refusing to hurry. Mainstream fact to let the coals sit on. Neanderthal sites across Europe show hearth features repeated through time. Reddened earth, ash lenses, charcoal, and heat-fractured stone, pointing to habitual fire control for warmth, light, cooking, and tool work. At some Middle Paleolithic sites, microware and residue on flint pieces even suggest use as strike-a-lights against iron pyrite, marcasite, to shower sparks into tinder, implying that Neanderthals weren't always waiting on lightning. They often made their own beginnings. That's not romance. That's skill with a good memory. When new beginnings are needed, the kit is small and serious. A sharp flint flake rides in one pouch, a nodule of pyrite in another. You hold the pyrite like a seed and the flint like a sentence, and you strike down so the sparks fall into a nest of thistledown and shaved bark you rubbed with a smudge of resin. The trick is rhythm, the other trick is patience. The glow arrives like a secret, first darker than you expect, then suddenly bright enough to own your eyes. You fold the nest gently and breathe. Fire loves encouragement more than air. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals always could spark fire at will or often curated it, capturing wild embers from lightning fires or neighboring groups, then transporting and banking them for weeks. The record offers hearths everywhere you look, but methods hide. Some layers shout spark making, others look like exquisite ember keeping. Your camp splits the difference the way sensible people do. Someone knows how to strike, everyone knows how to carry. Carrying has its own craft. A strip of birch bark is warmed and curled into a little scallop. A fingertip of damp clay smears the seam. The ember sits inside on a cushion of ash. You cap it with a second curl and tuck the whole thing into a bark tube stopped with grass. The tube rides in the shade of the net bag where roots keep it company. Each rest stop you open, check, feed a whisper, and close. When you reach a new camp, you don't start a fire, you introduce an ember to its new bed, like a traveler to a familiar dialect. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. A habit has crept into the black-stained bags at a few sites. Manganese dioxide lumps and powders. While it makes a fine black pigment, experiments suggest powdered manganese can lower the ignition temperature of certain woods and encourage coals. Is it fire helper body paint, or both? The camp treats it like spice for the hearth. A pinch on sluggish kindling, a smear when damp wood pretends to be shy. Your aunt insists it's for looking terrifying and lighting wet mornings. You don't argue with eyebrows like that. You keep a hearth geometry the fire understands. Coals in the middle for steady heat. A bank of ash on the windward side to act like a low, sleepy wall. And work zones around the rim. A stone cup corner for warming marrow and water. A char corner for coaxing tubers without scolding them. A smoke corner for persuading meat to last beyond its patience. Bones, when fuel is stingy, become polite logs, fat-rich shafts that hiss and flare, and then give a long, pale glow that keeps coals honest. The cave smells like soup thinking. You learn the stirring tools the way you learned cutlery back home. Antler tine for rearranging coals without panicking them. Green stick for lifting a tuber that wants to pretend it's a comet. Flat rib for fanning, slow as palm leaves in a story. Everything blackens and looks more professional than you feel, which is half the fun. Joke 2. You anoint your thumb with a ceremonial coal smudge and declare yourself assistant to the fire, which earns a promotion to assistant fire when you rekindle a sulking corner on your first try. Smoke is policy. You sight the hearth where the cave's draft has already declared allegiance. a sweet spot that pulls vapors up and out without bullying eyes. On insect nights you encourage a lazy plume to pass over ankles and elbows. On cunning nights, you add a pinch of aromatic leaves so the smoke learns manners. A lamp of fat in a small shell spends evenings on a rock shelf for tasks that want steady instead of lively. The shell's rim goes glossy with use polish, archaeologists call it later, and becomes a quiet artifact your hands already know. When you move camp, the fire gets first and last concern. First to pack, ember tucked, back up tinder doubled, last to bank. Banking is an art anyone can learn and everyone can botch. Too little ash and the coals brag themselves to sleep. Too much, and you smother the fox. You watch the ant's hands. She lays coals like beads, sprinkles ash like salt on a story, then sets a single telling stick across the top as the camp's version of "Do not disturb." In the morning, that stick will be the test. If it's kissed by heat, you've slept with security. If it's sullen, somebody gets to practice sparks. Mainstream fact, a second log on the evidence pile: Neanderthals heat-treated adhesives, notably birch tar, which requires controlled oxygen-poor heating, to half stone points to shafts. That means temperature control over long hours, not campfire accident. Whether they made tar in covered pits, rolled bark cones, or other contraptions, the recipe whispers the same thing. They could babysit fire like pros. Historians still argue whether every group shared the same repertoire: strike a light, ember transport, tar cooking, bone fuel, or whether techniques varied by landscape and time. Caves with abundant wood tell one story. Windskin steps tell another, where burned bones sometimes stands in for logs. The argument keeps journals warm. Your camp keeps hands warm and allows the paperwork to catch up later. As evening returns, you rehearse the coaxing again. Split kindling that doesn't scold, staged fuel that steps up as needed, patience like a recipe you can hum. A child offers you a crumb of tinder fungus they found on a dead birch and says, "For when the wind forgets to be kind." You tuck it next to the pyrite and feel, not for the first time, that technology here is confidence wrapped in plant and stone. Joke 3 pads in with the dusk. You tell the ember it's done a good day's walking and it rewards you by refusing to go out during your story. It purrs an orange, laps a little marrow grease you flicked into the coals by accident, and accepts a bark curl as dessert. By the time the stars rebut in the sky, the hearth has settled into the low talk you like best. You can hear dinner arranging itself at the edges, tubers finding their sweetness, a stone cup inventing simmer, and you can feel tomorrow because the ember under its ash blanket already exists there, a promise you've learned how to keep. The fire is not a trophy. It's a relationship, a pet that lives on patience and pays you back in light you can cook by and sleep you can trust. You move to the flattest patch of stone you can find, the anvil that every camp eventually discovers and then remembers with its shins. It's pocked and glossy from years of honest work, rimmed with the faint white freckles of fat spatter that tell you this is where appetites get solved. Beside it, 2 hammerstones, one squat and convincing, the other river smooth and opinionated. A few antler tines lie like pale punctuation marks. They're the retouchers you met yesterday, but tonight they double as bone handlers, the safest way to keep fingers from nominating themselves as ingredients. Step 1 isn't smashing. It's listening. You roll a long bone, a red deer's tibia, if the day has been generous, until the seam glints in the firelight. Your aunt taps the shaft with a knuckle and listens for the note, hollow enough to promise reward, not so green that it pretends to be a spring branch. You wedge the bone lengthwise in a shallow V chipped into the anvil's edge and pad the far side with a fold of hide so it won't skitter. The saving fingers trick is simple. Let stone hold what skin cannot. Joke 1. You tell the hammerstone you trust it with your future, and it replies in its way, "I am literally a rock." You pick the impact spot just off the mid-shaft, where the wall is thick but honest. The hammerstone rises, your wrist stays straight, and one clean strike lands with that dull thwack every marrow specialist loves. A percussion notch opens like a shy mouth, and a thin flake of bone pops free. The second blow doesn't aim for drama. It aims to propagate the crack along the seam, spiraling in that textbook green bone fracture that tells future archaeologists you were here, you were hungry, and you were competent. The bone opens. The cave inhales with you. The smell is buttery, faintly iron, the aroma of winter insurance. Mainstream fact to set beside the Neanderthal Middle Paleolithic sites across Europe and Western Asia, Krapina, El Sidron, Goit, Abrimula, and many more, preserve long bones with spiral fractures, percussion pits, impact flakes, and Neanderthal abrasions, all classic signatures of fresh bone marrow extraction. The pattern isn't random breakage by trampling or carnivore chewing. It's deliberate cracking when the bone was still green, to free that calorie-dense marrow that kept brains bright and fingers warm. You park the hammerstone, reach for an antler tine, and use it like a spatula to lift the first tongue of marrow free. No showiness, just slide, warm, and catch it in a shallow stone cup you warmed in the coals. If you're feeling kind to your future, you stir in a pinch of wild onion or salt-smelling ash from the corner where the wood burns cleanest, so the fat learns manners. Then the famous move, a thumbprint in a roasted tuber, a drip of marrow into the hollow, and silence as the camp conducts its favorite science experiment. Fat plus starch equals happy. Safety stays in the choreography. The antler tine becomes your keeper. Scoop with it, lever with it, pin the bone with it while you tease out pockets. When a stubborn web of trabeculae resists, you rotate the shaft and deliver a third controlled strike. Never toward your hand, always away, so only pride bruises if you misjudge. A child is promoted to shell collector, rescuing the popped bone flakes before they disappear into ash. Later those flakes serve as grease wicks or improvised scrapers for hide, which proves dinner is also supply chain. You work through a small queue, tibia, femur, radius. Different personalities, same diplomacy. The tibia is generous and straightforward. The femur is a bit of a show-off. The radius pretends to be empty until the antler finds its secret pockets. When one bone splinters ugly, you don't chase the mess with your hands. You reset, new wedge, new angle. A breath to remind your wrist it is a tool, not an argument. Joke 2. You announce the opening of bone and order, a judicial cracking service. The ant smiles and demotes you to bailiff of scraps. Between bones you lay the shafts near the fire's rim to warm them slightly, not to cook the fat out, just to soften the web inside so the marrow slides like it remembers its purpose. A too hot bone sulks and scalds. A too cold one clings like gossip. You find the middle by touching your cheek to the cortex. Warm bread, not angry kettle. The cave's soundtrack becomes percussion you could nap to, tap, thwack, sigh, scrape, punctuated by the steam whistle of a tuber that just remembered it's delicious. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals also rendered bone grease on lean, freezing weeks, crushing spongy ends, stone boiling them in hide or bark with heated rocks to float liquid fat, or whether that practice bloomed mainly in later or other populations. Evidence for stone boiling is often indirect: burned rocks, fat residues, patterns of Spongian destruction, and bones that have been pounded to paste can also be the signature of a camp that simply loves every last calorie. Your fire tonight chooses the marrow now option and parks the spongy ends to smoke dry for tomorrow's broth experiment. Grease has jobs other than being perfect on tubers. A thumb of it rubbed into sinew thread makes the fibers obedient. A smear on the haft helps seal against damp. Mixed with charcoal, it becomes a primitive black wax that settles into the use polish of tools like a signature. Quirky tidbit for your pouch: a marrow lamp, a shallow cup of stone or a shell, a twist of plant fiber for a wick, a spoon of marrow, makes a steady little light that doesn't scold your eyes. It's not a lighthouse. It's reading light for hands, and it turns late night retouching into a civil pastime. Technique keeps your fingers yours. You rest a non-striking hand on the antler, not the bone. You never cut the shaft. You pin it with tools or your knee behind a fold of hide. When you must hold, you do it behind the anvil lip, letting stone be the break. You keep your eyes on the edge, not the target. The hammerstone follows vision like a polite dog. And you stop when your brain says stop, even if your pride says, one more. Hands are the camp library. You do not lend them to hubris. Mainstream fact, another steady ember. Experimental archaeologists have replicated these breakage patterns, percussion pits, negative flake scars, spiral fractures, with hammerstones on anvils, confirming that the traces you see on old bones in museum drawers match the muscle memory you're building here. The same experiments show how bone grease rendering leaves different debris profiles, smashed spongy ends, heat-altered crumbs, then marrow tapping, letting analysts separate dinners from famine strategies in the record. Not every pile of broken bone belongs to human hands. This is where you learn the camp's detective game. Hyena chewing leaves acid-etched, broomed ends with toothed scores that chatter in parallel. Wolf gnawing peels epiphyses like an orange. Trampling crushes bone in messy plains. Your percussion scars are rounder, your flakes are cleaner, your anvil smears are organized. You grin at the thought that a scientist 60,000 years from now will recognize your rhythm. Joke 3 tiptoes and under the smoke, you invent a rating system for strikes. 1 antler up, 2 antlers up, 3 antlers and a wink. And the child from last night adds a category called Oops Soup, for when a bone decides to become broth ahead of schedule. When the last shaft is hollow, you put the fragments to work. Thin, boat-shaped flakes scrape hide smooth, narrow splinters become skewers. The thickest chunk becomes a wedge you'll use tomorrow to twist roots free without bruising them. Even the charred edges get their 15 minutes. Toothpicks for the elders, because interproximal grooves on Neanderthal teeth suggest that long before floss ads, people had the excellent idea of cleaning dinner out of tomorrow's smile. You finish with the polite disposal that keeps hyenas respectful. Heavy cortical bits in the midden downwind, greasy crumbs scattered thin so they cool before scavengers are invited. Tools licked clean with a grass napkin and set blade up to discourage curious. Pause. The anvil gets a wipe with a green handful. Not that stone needs hygiene, but the ritual keeps surfaces readable for the next session. Historians still argue whether regional preferences mattered. Did cold continental groups lean harder into marrow and grease while coastal groups counted on shellfish and fish oils for their fats? And how often camps cached bones for later cracking? A few sites hint at stored limbs, dragged home when fresh meat wasn't moving. Others suggest on-the-spot cracking and selective transport of fat-rich parts. Your cave does what caves do. It chooses the sensible middle and keeps the debate warm for anyone who needs footnotes to fall asleep. The stone cup of marrow now has the gloss you wanted. You tip a little onto a tuber crater for the small ones first, then circle the bowl so the work crew doesn't pretend they're not standing in line. The air tastes like gratitude. Your hands, though black at the fingertips, are uncut, which is victory in any era. You lay the hammerstone down where the child can't borrow it without permission, and you thank the anvil with a palm pressed flat, as if the stone were a beast you'd like to see again tomorrow. In exactly this mood. By the time the first stars blink awake and the hyenas clear their throats politely from somewhere that isn't your problem, the marrow is mostly memory. The anvil's cool, the hammerstones forget your name, and the camp remembers it has voices for songs that do not mention recipes at all. You sit back with the pleasant ache of used forearms and the specific contentment of fingers saved. The fire lowers its head and purrs. Somewhere inside the bones you didn't boil, tomorrow's broth is already practicing being comfort. You line up the day's muddy roots like a row of sleepy hedgehogs and slide them into the hearth's char corner, where the ash is hot but not vindictive. They hiss, complain, and then accept their fate with the good manners you wish certain people had at meetings. A child sets the official turning stick across her knees and waits for the cue. She is queen of the quarter turn, duchess of the gentle poke, empress of not yet. The air begins to smell like wet soil forgiving you, which is the surest sign you're cooking something honest. Your tools tonight are not impressive on paper and perfect in practice. A green stick shaved flat into a harmless blade, a rib for lifting, 2 pebbles for dull jobs and fingertip tests for brave ones. You park the fattest tubers, pignut cousins, cattail rhizome chunks, a few knobbly mystery potatoes, that your aunt with the eyebrows swore at before approving, just at the edge where coals can whisper to them without starting a fight. The skinny ones go closer. The stubborn ones wear a cap of damp leaves so they steam instead of sulk. Joke 1, unite the turning stick. Sir Spudley. And the child accepts the title with a nod so solemn the fire tries not to laugh. Listen to the lesson the hearth teaches through your nose. First there's green and muddy, then wet rope, then that deepening sweet that means starch is doing its chemistry. You pinch one open and watch the miracle you never get bored of. Grainy white flesh turning translucent, glassy, and then soft, starch granules gelatinizing, water slipping between their chains until the whole thing changes from argument to agreement. Mainstream fact, warm as the coals, heating gelatinizes starch, making it far easier to digest. In archaeological teeth, researchers have found cooked starch granules and plant phytoliths lodged in Neanderthal dental calculus, alongside charred plant bits on living floors. Evidence that roasting and warming roots and seeds wasn't a party trick, it was routine. Not every root wants to be your friend straight from the ground. A bitter tingle on the lip is the hill's way of saying, "Handle me politely." Some wild yams, some arrowhead cousins, some acorns we flirted with last section, each carries compounds your guts file under. Bureaucracy. Heat helps. Glycosides grumble and break. Oxalates rethink their life choices. Enzymes that bite at your belly denature and settle down. For the worst offenders, you add water and thyme, slice thin, leach near the stream in a bark ladle, then return to the Ember Hotel for finishing school. You learn to trust the sequence more than the ingredient. Soak, roast, rest, taste. Your aunt shows you the ash peel, a trick that earns her a shrine in your future kitchen. You coat a stubborn tuber with a thin paste of clay and ash, set it near the coals, and let the shell bake hard. When it cracks, you knock the clay off and the peel comes with it, dragging bitterness like a rude guest to the door. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. Some foragers in many times and places have used clay wrapping to draw out skins and mellow strong flavors. Whether your cave invented it or borrowed it, the technique feels like magic you can explain, and those are the best spells. You experiment at the rim with a stone cup half filled with creek water. Drop in root slices, add marrow the size of a thumbnail, a pinch of crushed wild onion, and let it shiver where the coals run out of breath. The surface shows tiny blips, not a boil, exactly the temperature where flavor learns to concentrate and fibers resign without complaint. You lift a slice with the rib spoon and it bends without breaking, al dente for caves. Joke 2, you declare the dish soupish. The camp promotes it to yes. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals leaned into complex plant processing, leaching, stone boiling, pounding and drying, as often as later people did, or whether they selected low-trouble species and let roasting do most of the work. The record offers charred tuber bits, starch residues, burned stones, and a chorus of hearths. It withholds staged cooking videos. Your cave chooses the practical middle, again. Do the simple thing well and add steps only when your tongue or your belly asks for them. Point 1 tuber decides to be dramatic, hissing like a snake that swallowed a kettle. You ease it out, set it on the flat stone, and give it the press and turn, heel of the hand, quarter turn, a sigh that sounds like bread remembering its manners. The skin splits and curls back, leaving a golden side that wants only a marrow drip and a pinch of ash salt to become the best thing you'll taste this week. You pass the first bite to a child, not because you are noble but because watching a small face meet sweetness is the earliest form of television. Your nose handles quality control. If you smell bitter smoke, you've gone too fast. Back the tuber away a hand's width. If you smell wet cellar, you've gone too slow. Give it air and company. You mind the zones around the hearth. Steam corner under leaf caps. Char corner for blistered skins. Simmer ledge for stone cup experiments. Smoke rail where a sliced rhizome learns patience for tomorrow. Fire is a workbench. You just learned where the tools hang out on a lark. You rub a root with crushed bay-like leaves and park it under a handful of damp reeds. The result is green perfume over sweetness, like a meadow teaching a potato to sing. You tuck away the recipe as a gesture, not a paragraph. Leaf plus steam plus turn. The camp respects methods more than measurements because hands are easier to carry than books. You keep one eye on the calendar that tubers whisper. In winter there's sugar vaults. In spring, sprouters with ideas. In late summer, mealy and easy. In autumn, dense and calm. Tonight's batch is late summer forgiving. The skins bubble without bursting, the cores sweeten before they collapse, and your turning stick does more waiting than heroics. You learn to taste the season in the way the flesh yields, a map written in softness. Mainstream fact, another coal on your confidence. Cooking plants doesn't just taste good, it unlocks energy. Gelatinized starch and softened fibers mean more calories sooner, which helps brains and walks alike. Charred remains from sites associated with Neanderthals include geophytes, plants that hide storage organs underground, rhizomes, tubers, bulbs, and residues on tools sometimes match those parts. Perfect evidence is rare, patterns are not. You practice the nib test. Touch a hot slice to your lower lip. If your lip doesn't file an official complaint, your mouth appreciates your caution. You pass slices clockwise, a superstition that's really just a traffic rule that keeps elbows from becoming literature. When the elder across from you taps the stone twice, the child performs the ceremonial quarter turn and receives a hazelnut as payment for services rendered. Joke 3. You decree that any tuber that whistles owes the camp a song. The child whistles back and declares the debt paid. The bitter crew gets special handling. A sliced acorn batch sits in a bark cup under a trickle at the stream, sullen tannins drifting away like guests who finally took the hint. Back at the fire you roast and grind them between flat stones into meal. Tomorrow that meal meets marrow and becomes porridge that votes, yes, on mornings. You can feel the planning lengthen. More steps, more payoff, more sleep saved later because breakfast won't be a scramble. Historians still argue whether the range of plants used was broad everywhere or locally narrow. Did groups on chalk downs quarry parsnipkin while lakeshore camps leaned on cattail, and mountain valleys banked on bulbs? They also debate just how much plants contributed compared to big game, since isotopes love meat stories and teeth love to keep plant secrets. The likely answer is an accordion. Some weeks fat forward, some weeks root choir. Always a hand on the bellows of fire. By the time your simmer cup has told a whole novella in tiny bubbles, the tubers have quit arguing and learned manners. You crack one open and paint the inside with marrow, then add a fleck of crushed greens for a bright comma. The taste is so plainly right you have to close your eyes to keep from grinning at the fire like you've just been proposed to. The camp does not clap. It breathes the way satisfied rooms do, slower, wider. Cleanup is structure disguised as laziness. Peels go downwind to the midden, already telling hyenas what they can and cannot expect. The leaf caps dry on a rock to become kindling tomorrow. The stone cup gets a handful of sand and a swirl. No one wants last night's romance turning into grit in today's teeth. You nest 2 hot tubers in ash for morning. Breakfast loves to arrive early without making a scene. You sit back and study your hands, smoky, a little slick, Unburned because you treated the hearth like a teacher, not a toy. What you cooked tonight did not require a recipe or a measurement. It required attention and a willingness to listen to smells, to watch for the tint that means sweet, to accept that some ingredients arrive wearing warning labels you can negotiate with heat and water. The ground remains your pantry. The fire remains your editor. The meal remains a conversation you have learned to conduct softly and on time. When the last tuber gives up a thin ribbon of steam that looks like a sigh written down, you tuck the coals under their ash blanket and grant the night its quiet. Out beyond the cave mouth, the hill rehearses its crickets. Inside, your mouth holds the aftertaste of sweet earth and smoke, and your brain, which loves glucose more than it loves philosophy, decides to let sleep make the next decision. The turning stick rests across the hearth like a note that says, "Tomorrow the same, if you please." You spread your little kingdom on the floor by the hearth. Sticks, stones, bones, and string, and it looks, to an untrained eye, like clutter. To the camp it's cutlery, quiet utensils that make roots surrender, fat behave, and hides stop acting like opinions. You've met them in passing, digging sticks, scrapers, retouchers, but tonight you learn their names in your hands. Start with the digging stick, the most honest tool you own. It's a limb of hardwood trimmed to your hip, fire hardened at the beveled tip until the grain tightens and gleams. You stroke a thumb along the bevel and feel the use polish. That glassy sheen made of 1,000 roots argued loose. A charred belt an inch above the point shows where you rotated it in the coals to toughen it. A sinew wrap just higher keeps cracks from gossiping. When the ground is kind, the stick is enough. When the soil remembers winter, you slide a little antler sleeve over the tip for a stronger bite. Joke 1. You present the stick to the camp as chef, and it bows by not splintering. Beside it lies your pebble knife, a thin flake of flint that didn't ask to be beautiful and became it anyway. In slant light you can see the micro-serrated edge Neanderthals loved, sharp enough to shave tuber skin, thin as manners, tough enough to nick sinew without sulking. 2 holes in a bark sheath keep it from auditioning for foot jewelry when you're not looking. The sheath smells like smoke and fat, which is to say home. Now the tool that fixes all other tools, the retoucher. It's a piece of antler you can close your hand around, with pitted faces where you've pressed and pecked flint edges back to perfection. You brace a scraper on your thigh, set the retoucher at that angle your wrist remembers, and push, tick, tick, until the edge catches light evenly again. The sound is a tiny metronome for patience. Retouchers are how you turn good stone into longer-lasting good stone. They're also how archaeologists later recognize a workshop, pitting, striations, a storm of tiny flake scars that say, someone had standards. Mainstream fact to set by the fire. Middle Paleolithic toolkits associated with Neanderthals routinely include scrapers, points, denticulates, toothed edges, and retouchers made from deer or horse bone. Many stone blanks were shaped by the Levallois method, a planned course strategy that produces predictable flakes. Microwear and residue analyses show edges used on hide, wood, and plant tissue, not just meat, while chemical traces and impressions reveal hafting with adhesives, birch tar and sometimes bitumen, binding stone to handles. In a few German sites, lumps of birch tar even carry fingerprints or tooth impressions, tiny selfies of glue day. You lay out the scrapers like spoons. There's the convex side scraper for rounding tubers and thinning skins, the end scraper for smoothing wood, a notched scraper that hugs cordage so it can be twisted into obedience without fraying. Each bears the luster of work well done. Hide gives a greasy gloss, wood leaves striated shine, plants polish softly, like fog on a window. You touch each edge to the pad of your thumb, the old test, and you respect the whisper it gives back. Historians still argue whether the wooden half of this toolkit, digging sticks, throwing sticks, handles, baskets, was as standardized as the stone, and how widely hafting was practiced versus using flakes in hand. Wood rarely survives, so the debate is a polite wrestling match between absence of evidence and evidence of absence. What we do have, sconning in type wooden spears from older Pleistocene layers, tar glues, microwear at hafting angles, suggests that when Neanderthals wanted a handle, they made one, and when they didn't, they adjusted their grip and got on with dinner. You inventory the string. Lengths of twisted bast and sinew lie wrapped around a short stick like a sleeping snake. You warm sinew near the coals, rub in marrow to make fibers agreeable, and twist loop twist until the cord sings one note instead of two. Cord keeps shoes closed, bundles tame, handles tight. It also becomes a net bag when the day surprises you with more roots than arms. You learn the 2-knot code the camp likes. 1 knot means eat now. 2 means fix first. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. The camp keeps a tool scent on purpose. You rub a smear of resin on the inside of sheaths and cordage, not just to waterproof them but because resin remembers. When a flake rides home inside a bark tube that smells like resin and smoke, it doesn't go exploring. Your brain files that scent as belongs here. It's the Pleistocene version of color-coding drawers. You practice hafting a small flake to a stick as a paring knife. A dab of birch tar warmed at the fire goes tacky. You seat the stone. A couple of sinew turns clamp the joint. A dusting of ash to sticky fees your fingers and hardens the surface. You hold the handle, not the edge, and suddenly your wrist relaxes. Leverage has joined the conversation. You try the knife on a cattail slice. The cut is clean, your hand is safe, and your aunt nods like a foreman signing off on the day's work. Mainstream fact, another ember of confidence. Birch tar is among humanity's earliest synthetic materials, requiring controlled, low-oxygen heating of bark. Neanderthal tar lumps found at sites like Koenigsau show it wasn't an accident. It was procedure. The presence of tar residues at tool hafts, combined with mastic and bitumen traces elsewhere, says adhesives weren't a rare party trick. They were in the drawer. You check the kits that live with people rather than rooms. The forager bundle, digging stick, flake, net bag, 2 nuts for morale. The hearth bundle, retoucher, antler tine, rib spoon, stone cup. The hide bundle, end scraper, notch scraper, sandstone for dull love. The repair roll, a strip of hide with pockets, wraps around the lot and ties with a cord whose not only you and your eyebrows understand. When weather turns rude, everything still smells like pine, smoke, and patience. Joke 2, you hold up the retoucher and declare it a PhD in sharp. The child counters by awarding your digging stick a master's in mud. The camp agrees that all degrees are honorary and should be kept away from the fire. You try your hand at edge etiquette. When an end scraper gets sulky, you do not drag it through sand like a bored dog. You give it 10 gentle pressure flake kisses with the retoucher, strop it on green wood, and test again. When a flake finally dies, you honor it by turning it into a bark splitter or grease spreader. Nothing retires without a second career. Even bone flakes from the Marrow party join the workforce. Skewers, wick cradles, tiny wedges that convince lids to behave. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals curated long-lived personal toolkits, items repaired and carried for months, or relied more on expedient flakes made on the spot and discarded after a task. Caches of high-quality stone far from its source suggest planning in transport. Thick fields of simple flakes near resources suggest make use move on. Your camp, unsurprisingly, uses both. Keep a few favorites, turn rocks into knives when a tuber insists, and never weep when a flake goes home as a midden memory. You tune your body to the tools. Kneel on the rolled hide, not the unforgiving grit. Keep your wrists straight when you strike. Brace the work against bone and wood, never bare flesh. Anchor your elbows so the flint behaves like a disciplined sentence. The longer you work, the quieter you get, and the tools grow clear in your hands, as if the camp had been teaching you its grammar and you've finally stopped interrupting with adjectives. A lamp, a shallow shell with marrow and a twist of fiber, joins the hearth light, and your world gains edges without gaining glare. In that mellow circle you add notches to your digging stick, tiny marks that mean this valley's roots are honest, and you rub a thumb of marrow along the handle to seal the story. Use writes the prettiest decorations. Mainstream fact, one more steady log. Microware from Middle Paleolithic scrapers shows hide working as a major activity. Thin, repetitive strokes that round the edge just so, supporting the picture of clothing and coverings crafted from animal skins long before needles and thread turned fussy. Woodworking traces are common too, planing, shaving, grooving, which fits the world you're living in tonight. A camp rich in sticks that became tools because hands had time. Quirky tidbit number 2, the camps. Don't lose it. Ritual is a call and touch. Before sleep, someone hums a 3-note phrase. On that cue, each person touches their knife sheath, retoucher, and cord roll. It feels like superstition. It functions like inventory. You fall asleep with your palm on the bark tube, and it falls asleep exhaling resin into your wrist. Joke 3 arrives as you roll the kit, you declare the toolkit. Minimalist. The ant raises an eyebrow at the 8 items on your lap and says, maximally small. You accept the correction and tuck the phrase away with the retoucher. By the time the fire lowers its voice to the library volume you love, the tools have found their places, and your hands have remembered how to stop. You bank the coals with ash and lay the digging stick across the hearth's lip. The camp's soft do not touch sign. The cave breathes. The night agrees to keep watch. Outside, wind fingers the grass like a tired harpist. Inside, your toolkit settles into silence, ready to be obvious again tomorrow the moment a root pretends not to know you. You slide closer to the glow until your knees learn the hearth's etiquette. Not too close to bully the coals, close enough to hear the evening's rules arrive without speeches. Every camp has them, and this one keeps them in hands rather than laws. The first rule is a path, not a paragraph, clockwise. Bowls, bones, rib spoons, and the stone cup of soupish you invented earlier drift one direction so elbows don't draft new myths. You tuck in behind the child with the turning stick, Sir Spudley's keeper, Duchess of the Quarter Turn, and wait your turn like someone who has finally figured out that sleep is easier when fairness happens early. The ladle tonight is a scapula with a drilled grip, its edge polished to a moon by a lifetime of soup rehearsals. It is the one object nobody argues with. When the ant with the eyebrows tilts that bone, the line moves as if the bone itself has a voice. She knows the second rule by muscle, elders first. Not because they're fancy, but because warm fat meets cold wrists and tells them the day is over. Next come the small mouths. Toddlers who haven't earned molars for negotiation, and then the people who carry today. You note the quiet logic. The order pays debts your eyes don't always see. Mainstream fact belongs here, tucked by the fire as neatly as a bull. Neanderthal skeletons include individuals with severe injuries and heavy tooth wear, some even nearly toothless, who lived years after those challenges, like the famous La Chapelle UX saints, Old Man, and the Shanidar individuals. Survival past such setbacks implies care and provisioning. Others processed or shared soft foods, tended fires, and portioned tasks to keep everyone inside the circle. A rule like, elders first, isn't politeness, it's the engineering of a group that lasts. The third rule is a trick disguised as a treat. Little ones taste first, whenever a new plant joins the menu. Not because children are expendable, quite the opposite. They sample the faintest smear on a lip while 7 adults watch with the tension you usually reserve for weather. If no tingles or grimaces arrive, the bowl widens. The child beams at their promotion. You beam at a protocol so old it forgot it was science. Joke 1. The child declares himself chief of safety, and the ant nightly taps Sir Spudley on their shoulder as if sticks were swords. You watch portion math done with gestures. A wrist flick means more soupish to the hunter who hauled. 2 fingers pinched together asks for saltash pinch only, and a moderate ladle tilt toward a nursing mother happens as gravity, not as announcement. This choreography leaves no one grand and no one hungry. When there is too little to satisfy every appetite, the camp enlarges tomorrow instead of anyone's bowl. Set traps, widen the loop, wake early, walk farther. Fairness here acts like a savings account the whole group can withdraw from later. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal groups followed an egalitarian sharing norm like many recent hunter-gatherers, meat quickly distributed, prestige flattened, or whether access sometimes tracked skill, kin, and momentary status. They debate division of labor too. Did sex and age predict tasks, or did winter and landscape reshuffle the deck so often the only rule was competence? The bones and hearts refuse to testify about intent. They reveal patterns and possibilities. Your cave gives the middle answer again, rules that flex but don't break, and a line that behaves even when hunger wants to improvise. The ladle's voice teaches patience. It never scrapes the cup to prove there's more. It never spills to make friends. It tilts and returns, until you feel your own breath match its tempo. You notice the 4th rule when the child reaches for a second ladle and the ant's eyebrow rises. 1 for now, 2 when the circle gets smaller. Scarcity becomes pacing rather than panic. Somewhere in your chest, a modern part of you that loves notification sighs and turns its volume down. You catch the sharing tools you missed in earlier sections because you were busy not burning your fingers. A horn cup for quick sips migrates around the circle, wiped with grass between hands, set down on the same flat stone every time so you can find it in the dim. A bone pick lives under the anvil lip for teeth rescue, returning to its spot so concerted gnawing doesn't become tomorrow's dental archaeology. A split stick pinches small greens from the simmer cup without fingers scalding their curiosity. The quiet pedantry of "put the tool back" keeps the fire from turning into a lost and found drawer. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some hearth areas at sites show clusters of small roasting spots around a main fire, which a few romantic archaeologists nickname hearth constellations. Whether the term sticks or not, you can see the use tonight. Satellite embers for children's portions, elders warming bowls, and the shy plant that needs a slower trial. The big fire makes comfort. The little lights make fairness programmable. You also hear the rule about silence. Not absolute hush. There are jokes, coughs, and a long story about a goat who did not understand, no, but a quiet that lets ears serve eyes. The person ladling listens for breath hitches that signal too hot or too much, and for the micro pause when somebody is shy about asking for seconds. Your own bowl teaches you to wait between mouthfuls so your belly can report honestly. The original, mindful eating, with less porcelain and more common sense. Joke 2. You attempt a sage nod and dribble soupish on your chin. The child solemnly hands you the grass napkin of dignity. When a guest shows up, tonight it's the gangly teenage cousin from the Ridge group. The circle moves outward without a speech about hospitality. A portion flows from 4 bowls into a 5th as easily as water flows downhill. The only ceremony is a tap-tap with the ladle that means, "Welcome, take this one before you sit." Your modern brain, which loves to categorize mine and yours, learns to relax around ours. The leftovers rule is a ladder, not a cliff. First the elders keep a spoon of marrow for night ache. Then mothers tuck ash-baked tubers into a warm corner for morning hands. Then the dogs and ravens receive parables about generosity in the form of clean bones tossed beyond the downwind line. Once hyenas turn their attention to the midden, the camp's sleeping maps become safer. You grin like someone who has learned the city's trash day and suddenly stopped being haunted by banana peels. Historians still argue whether beach shares were obligatory, a social contract enforced by satire and side-eye, or strategic, traded for alliances and reciprocity across visits. Refits of broken bones split between hearths suggest food moved within camps. Cut marks far from kill sites imply selective transport of choice pieces. Isotopes hint at frequent meat meals. Calculus and hearth botanicals insist plants earn their keep. The debate is lively. Your bowl is quiet. You take your turn, then let the ladle go. You notice how care hides in tiny habits. The child who's served as turning duchess gets a nut without fanfare. The hunter with a twisted ankle is assigned the dignified job of coal guardian, children setting fuel by his knee like offerings. An elder who doesn't chew well receives pre-mashed tuber. Your rib spoon finally plays its starring role, so pride doesn't have to lose an argument with physics. None of this waits for a vote. The rules are older than commentary. Joke 3 pads over from the simmer ledge. The ant lifts the ladle and asks if anyone wants just a whisper more. Half the circle raises bowls. The other half raises eyebrows. The ladle finds a way to make the difference immaterial. As the line thins, the portion math softens into gossip. Who saw the bee tree wake? Did the badger move back to the eastern hollow? Where did you leave the ash peel clay so no one turns it into toy and teases the fire? The talk is practical and warm-blooded. You understand that sharing rules are not an overlay. They are the skeleton under everything. A way to make sure tomorrow shows up with its mood improved. When bowls finally resolve to shine, the scapular ladle gets a sand swirl and a rinse, then rests on its appointed stone like a moon setting exactly on time. You press a palm to your belly, not an apology, just a thank you, and watch the ant lay 2 sticks across the embers in that equal sign that means, bank soon. The circle collapses into smaller rings. Repair here, laughter there, a foot rub under domestic secrecy, and the ladle's authority slips into the role of night manager as if it had always wanted a desk job. You stretch your legs and let the rules settle into your bones. Clockwise, elders first, small mouths tested, 1 for now, 2 when fewer. If you squint you can see versions of those lines in places with porcelain and electric light, but they feel more honest here, warmed by marrow and enforced by eyebrows. The cave's breath evens out. The fire purrs that library volume you love. A raven clicks somewhere outside in that way that sounds like approval. And you, with your bowl emptied at exactly the right time, discover that fairness tastes a lot like rest. You learn the evening's other recipe, the one with no bowls, by watching the air. Smoke is not a mistake here, it's policy. The hearth sits where last night's practice put it, not too deep in the cave, where smoke would sulk and paint your lungs, not too far out, where wind would throw tantrums and midges would register complaints, but in that draft-sweet spot where the cave throat naturally pulls. The embers do their housekeeping, the plume climbs, and the mosquitoes read the room and decide to try another restaurant. You test the boundary with your cheek. 1 step forward and your eyes prickle. 1 step back and the air learns manners again. The spot was found long before you got here by people who watched cobwebs barely tremble and soot smudges on stone make a faint arrow toward the door. The ant with the eyebrows calls it the breathing place, taps the floor with Sir Spudley's turning stick, and that settles the matter more firmly than any treaty. Joke 1. You promote her to Minister of Drafts. She declines graciously on the grounds that the wind already reports to her. Mainstream fact to keep in the warm end of your pocket. Many cave camps used by Neanderthals show repeated hearths near entrances, with ash lenses, charcoal, and reddened floors stacked in layers, and soot recorded on ceilings and walls in patterns that make sense for fires kept where ventilation is decent. In open-air sites, hearths often sit in slight hollows or lee sides that suggest wind reading, The same practical talent your nose is trying to learn now. People didn't just light fires, they placed them. Once the plume behaves, the camp begins its smoke chores. A smudge bundle, fresh juniper or mugwort if the hills obliged, green pine tips if not, goes onto the coals at the ankle corner. It hisses, sulks, and then builds a soft curtain that mosquitoes and midges hate the way you hate wet socks. A second bundle sits at bedding height, smoldering under a little dripstone so it doesn't get ideas above its station. The effect isn't perfume, it's policy with manners. The air smells like clean wood thinking hard. You help with the fan work, the quietest job that somehow feels like leadership. A flat rib nudges smoke across the floor rather than up into faces. A palm leaf never shows up in this climate, so a bark paddle takes its place and proves it was a fan in a past life. The goal is not more smoke, it's smarter smoke, a sheet thin enough to chase flies, thick enough to annoy mosquitoes, and polite enough to let eyes remain residents of faces. You learn the rhythm, 1 sweep, 2 breaths, check the draft, repeat. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals organized interior space with smoke management as deliberately as later groups, placing sleeping, working, and storage in clean air pockets, or whether they mostly hugged the entrance and let wind do the thinking. Some caves read like floor plans, hearth here, napping scatter there, bedding over yonder where so thins. Others are messier, as if the camp followed weather day by day. Your hearth takes the diplomatic middle, clever placement, flexible habits, and a willingness to move the sleep when the wind becomes a politician. Tonight you push a smoke rail through the dog door the camp keeps for pests, the small notch in the rock where drafts slip. Meat strips hang there on a cord run, glistening with marrow-basted self-importance. The smoke kisses them into tomorrow, sketching the first chapter of preservation you'll read in full when cold insists. Insects do not apply for housing on smoked meat as quickly. Flies rethink their life choices. Mold needs a different cave. The camp calls it hanging the moon. It looks pretty, and it keeps dinner from joining somebody else's biography. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. Fine wood ash rubbed on ankles and wrists makes a surprisingly decent bug discourager. It dries the surface, muddies the signals insects follow, and mixed with a thumb of marrow, becomes a kind of bug paste that stays where you put it. There's even a camp superstition that ash on the bridge of the nose keeps midges from boating there. Whether or not the science applauds, the midges take their business to another polling station. The bedding gets smoke, too, but kindly. Last night's reed mats and skins are draped over a stick rack near the high part of the plume where heat is shy and smoke is curious. Fleas and mites dislike tenants who fumigate on schedule. Damp quits. The whole sleeping corner smells like fire that did you a personal favor. Before bed, a handful of ash under the nose of the rack acts like kitty litter for humidity, which is the most glamorous sentence ash will ever get to star in. You keep a smoke log without writing it down. If the plume lurches low and eyes complain, a stone shim under the fire pan lifts the bed of coals and restores attitude. If sparks start auditioning for the roof, you cap a corner with damp clay to slow their enthusiasm. If a gust bullies the door, you park a screen of brush in the lee and let the entrance narrow by the width of your patience. None of it is grand. All of it is the maintenance that keeps rooms from turning into stories. Mainstream fact. Another coal for your confidence. Smoke isn't only a mosquito memo, it's a multi-tool. Across many foraging societies, smudge fires reduce biting insects, fumigate bedding and hides, slow spoil meat and fish, and help tan skins by opening fibers and lending phenols that discourage the wrong kind of growth. While direct Neanderthal treatises stubbornly refuse to exist, their hearth stacks, charred racks, and smoke-blackened pockets fit the same toolbox. Joke 2 slips out with the plume. You tell the smoke it's on guest duty. It replies by making the mosquito at your elbow agree to a peaceful transfer of power. You notice how draft knowledge bleeds into everything else. The Marrow lamp you love sits on the clean air side where it won't soot your nose hairs into a new hairstyle. The stone cup doing soupish keeps to the edge where it shivers instead of boils, the steam rising with the draw so it doesn't weep back into the fire and start gossip. Even conversation slides into the habit. People face across the draft so smoke schemes past, not into, their stories. Historians still argue whether the frequency of indoor smoke exposure was enough to leave health signatures, chronic irritation, soot in sinuses, and whether seasonal camp shifts mitigated that. Models of cave airflow say good placement helps a lot. Ceiling soot says smoke still happened. Your lungs vote for moderation, work by the hearth, rest in the clean eddies, and keep the Minister of Drafts in office for life. You do a short smoke walk, a patrol as dignified as any guards, checking the mosquito lines at the door, the meat rail, the bedding rack, and the sleeping corner where the cat alternative, a hide bundle, pretends to purr. You touch the rock above the plume. The warmth is thready, not urgent, which is your cue that the smoke is busy but not ambitious. You approve. Before bed, there's one last ceremony. The ant lifts a damp twig and lays it on the ankle corner, one final smudge for the late shift biters. She rubs 2 fingers in the ash and scribes a small equal sign across the coals, your favorite, bank soon message. The child salutes Sir Spudley and nests the turning stick on the hearth rim where it can dream of promotions. Joke 3. You inform the mosquitoes that the kitchen is closed. One bumps into the smoke, sneezes if such a thing is possible, and goes off to file a complaint with the wind. You settle onto racks that got their smoke and now smell like forests singing at a low volume. The air is clean where your nose lives, busy where the pests live, and you're newly smug about the way a room can be tuned like a flute. Outside, the stream negotiates with rocks in a voice that convinces your eyelids to admit defeat. Inside, the ember curls under its ash blanket and agrees to purr through the watch. It turns out, mosquito control is just another name for thoughtful placement of fire, of bowls, of sleep, of breath. You don't sweat your way to peace. You shape it with draft and habit. Tomorrow will bring fat and root and maybe a goat rumor. Tonight brings that near silent applause you've grown to love, a room that works, a plume that minds its manners, and biters that can't find the buffet. The policy has passed. The House votes yes by letting you fall asleep before the last log thinks to crack. You learn to read the year on a plate. Winter writes in fat cursive, bold strokes of marrow, the gloss of roasted subcutaneous trimmings, bone ends parked close to the smoke so tomorrow won't have to invent flavor from scratch. Summer writes in sweet italics, berries like parentheses, greens that make your teeth clap politely, roots that don't demand heroics. Your belly is bilingual by now. When the air bites, you go grease first. When the air holds your hand, you go fruit forward, and nobody files a complaint either way. Cold starts its letter with wind. You feel it find the seams of your clothes, the same way a hyena finds the seam on a bone. The hearth rises a little more confidently at dusk. Sir Spudley, the turning stick, earns a promotion to Marshal of the Coals. You crack longer bones in the fast dusk so the marrow can announce itself before your fingers forget their manners. A stone cup of fat warms on the simmer ledge, a lamp gets a spoonful to steady your hands while you retouch edges, and the meat strips on the smoke rail learn diligence like it's a winter subject. Mainstream fact to keep by the fire. Neanderthal skeletons and their hearth debris often speak the language of big game, red deer, reindeer, bison, horse, with cut marks, spiral-fractured long bones, and burned fat residues. Stable nitrogen isotope values in Neanderthal bones frequently sit at high trophic levels, consistent with regular meat consumption, while plant microremains, cooked starch granules and phytoliths, trapped in dental calculus show that plants join the menu, too. Across many late autumn and winter kill sites, the seasonality of prey, read from tooth growth and cementum rings, hints that hunters often met animals when they were fattest. The year's grease dividend arriving on schedule. You start saving fat the way sensible people save daylight. Without speeches, with a plan. The spongy epiphyses that didn't make tonight's soup get pounded between stones tomorrow when the light behaves. If fuel is kind, you try the stone into water trick. Fire-heated cobbles dropped into a hide-lined pit to coax grease out, skimming the floating shine into a bark cup. Whether you call it rendering or seducing, the result softens mornings when the world is stingy. Your aunt, minister of drafts and opinions, dabs a bit on sinew thread so it winds without complaining and mutters that fat is not just food, it's harmony paste. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals routinely rendered bone grease as a winter strategy, smashing spongy ends and stone boiling them to float liquid fat, or mostly stopped at marrow, with grease rendering blooming later in other populations and places. The traces are tangled. Crushed ends and burned stones can signal grease work, but they can also testify to enthusiastic marrow parties and chilly evenings. Your camp, ever the diplomat, does the middle one would allows, crack for now, simmer for later. Winter's vegetables don't go on vacation, they just hide better. Roots keep their bank accounts underground, and you raid them with respect. Pignut cousins, cattail rhizomes, the stubborn bulbs you treated with ash peel last week. A handful of greens, conifers steeped into a piney, comfortingly medicinal brew, shows up when coughs decide to make music. Joke 1, you christen it forest tea, and the child asks if the forest wants its cup back. You lean into preservation the way a river leans into gravity. Meat strips hang higher and closer to the smoke ceiling. Marrow ends get smoke dried before you pound them, so they don't invite every small thief in the valley. The midden walks downwind by another few steps. Tied stones keep the ravens honest. When snow arrives, it joins the kitchen staff. Marrow bones sleep in it. Berries nap in a berry bag like rubies in a cold purse. Finished fat sits in a bark tub tucked into a drift that behaves like a free larder. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. On the coldest runs, the camp sometimes seals fat in a clean stomach skin with a pinch of char stirred in. Call it a superstition or an ancient ant's trick. The char tints the surface, discourages opportunists, and makes it easier to spot spills in snow, which the ravens would happily audition for. You don't know if it's chemistry or theater. You know it works well enough for the eyebrows to approve. Then the year turns. The first thaw drip from the cave mouth sounds like a polite applause. Meat strips get demoted to background, the smoke rail becomes herb rail, and the stone cup trades marrow for water because thirst remembers how to sing. The net bag comes home with berries that burst at the exact pressure that creates friendships, shoots so tender they feel like rumors, and greens that do for your joints what jokes do for arguments. Summer writes its menu in color. Your bowl turns red-violet when you mash berries against a hot stone and let the pectin pretend it knows you. Roots still visit, but they wear lighter jackets. You steam slices under damp leaves and they accept their fate kindly. Nuts go from secret to appointment, and the anvil gets a quieter shift. 2 taps to crack, 1 to admire. You catch yourself humming more and counting less. Joke 2. The child names the berry smear on your lips. Or paint for naps. And you cannot improve that. Mainstream fact, steady as a summer rock, plant remains in Neanderthal-associated contexts. Charred tuber bits, seed husks, nutshell fragments, and those cooked starches on teeth tell you that warm seasons added sweet and bright to the winter heavy. Even in sights shouting meat, the plant chorus pipes up as you zoom in. Some coastal and lakeside caves had shellfish and fish, limpet piles and singed bones joining the ledger. Another warm weather gift when rivers stop arguing with themselves. Historians still argue whether Winter diets tilted so far toward meat only that micronutrients had to come entirely from organ meats and marrow, or whether even in cold months groups kept up root foraging and stored plant foods enough to cover gaps. They also debate how wide the summer plant list ran, dozens of species versus favorites, and how much processing turned bitter into bearable. Your spoon chooses plural, liver and greens, marrow and roots, berries and the small lectures your teeth give your brain when fruit season returns. Season tunes tasks too. In winter you shorten loops, camp closer to wind-smart shelters, and make the fire a citizen with voting rights. In summer you lengthen your errands, wander for shells, ochre, good flint, and trade news along the ridge path. Small swaps of honeycomb, a pretty shell, a new knot somebody swears is faster. The ladle rules stay, but their tempo lightens. You see more children carrying their own bowls without dribbling, and you begin to suspect that generosity grows like grass under long days. Storage learns manners with the weather. In winter you bury cold, dry slow, smoke like a poet. In summer you eat fresh, dry quick, save what ants can't steal. You pencil the ground with charm marks, little memory notes near the beach that leans like it wants a conversation. So autumn you can find the nut fall without having to reinvent the map. When a storm rearranges your handwriting, you shrug and walk by smell. Spicy crushed leaves and the sweet of rot will draw you either to dinner or to a story you'll dine out on later. Winter has its songs, mostly in minor keys. The sound of fat waking in the panstone, the soft thock of the marrow strike, the polite argument of snow on the roof. Summer hums in major, berry laughter, green squeaks, the plop of a fish that keeps its own counsel. You keep 3 jokes with you for both seasons. First, Forrest T. is brave. Second, war paint for naps is policy. Third, Sir Spudley is always on duty. Joke 3 arrives now. You promise the fire you won't drip berry on it. The fire answers by not popping a coal onto your ankle. Peace accords hold. You remember the health of elders in both weathers. In winter you pre-mash tubers and thin soups with a ladle that knows its job. In summer you pass the seedless mash so nobody argues with teeth. The sharing rules flex slightly. Nursing gets first sweet when it exists. Ache gets first fat when it nags. And you watch how that quiet predictability keeps sleep close by. Nobody counts calories. Everybody counts people. The year, which once felt like a circle, starts to feel like a spiral. The same stops, higher knowledge. You learn which catkins mean. That's later. Which flowers mean. Root now. Which animal coats mean fat hour is arriving. You tune the fire the way you tune the menu. Less wood in summer nights, more banked in winter mornings, the lamp doing extra overtime when days shrink, the smoke rail trading strips for herbs when insects return to apply for their old jobs. When you lie down, you can tell the season by how your spine talks to the ground. In winter it says, "Thank you for fat." In summer it says, "Thank you for sweet." The cave agrees with both. It has room for grease that lets fingers feel alive, and room for berries that let brains turn the brightness down slowly. You bank the coals with that equal sign gesture you've grown fond of, tuck 2 ash-baked roots for dawn, and leave a little grease thumbprint on the stone cup so the morning can start already forgiven. Somewhere outside, the river edits its own script, ice or insects, depending on chapter. Inside, your bowl tells you a truth so simple it deserves a seat by the fire. Season feeds you if you let it. You do, and it does. Winter fat, summer sweet. Marrow when the stars are bossy. Berries when the sun can't stop bragging. It isn't a menu. It's manners with weather, and manners, you've learned, make sleep taste better. You hear them before you see them. The punctuation the night uses when it wants to keep you honest. A pat on leaf litter, a huff at the edge of the dark, a laugh that isn't a joke at all. Guests with sharp teeth keep their own calendars, and your camp knows the etiquette. You don't panic, you organize. The hearth sits up straighter. The smoke rail thickens like a raised eyebrow. Sir Spudley, off duty from tuber twirling, becomes a coal shepherd. Even the Marrow lamp on the shelf brightens as if it has an opinion about diplomacy. First contact is eyes, small twin coins catching starlight, floating at the margin like punctuation deciding whether to be a period or a comma. Hyenas prefer the midden. You've wisely walked farther downwind each evening. They want the grease whispers and bone perfume the valley's breezes have been bragging about. You let them have the downwind story, cleaned of marrow, robbed of drama, because peace begins with placing trash like a treaty. Joke 1. You announce to the dark that the restaurant is closed but the dumpster is open, and a hyena giggles in a key that says it accepts the business model. Mainstream fact to put beside the fire where everyone can see it. Many Middle Paleolithic caves and rock shelters show alternating access between humans and carnivores. Cut marks overlain by tooth marks and tooth marks overlain by cut marks on the same bones. Hyena coprolites, those white, chalky droppings made of digested bone, littering. Layers with hearths, gnawing and spiral fractures mixed in patterns that read like turn-taking at carcasses and camps. People ate. Hyenas and wolves visited. Sometimes people came back and cracked what remained. The dirt remembers the negotiation. Your aunt, the minister of drafts, now moonlighting as secretary of night noises, adds a dry stick to the loud corner of the fire. It pops with the stagecraft of a polite firework. You lay 2 glow sticks, actual sticks tipped with bright coals, on either side of the hearth like eyes facing outward. It's not magic, it's optics for predators who prefer uncertainty. A pair of torches, bark curls smeared with fat, tufted with resinous shavings, wait on the doorstone. If the giggles turn into auditions, you'll show the night a little moving flame and remind it who rehearsed for this. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals met carnivores as competitors first, primary hunters whose kills were contested by hyenas and lions, or as opportunists, sometimes scavenging fresh predator kills and sometimes being scavenged in turn. They also argue about wolves. Were late Neanderthals already dealing with commensal canids nosing around camps? Or does that chapter belong mostly to later Upper Paleolithic neighbors? The bones won't take sides politely. They offer overlapping tooth and cut narratives and invite patience. Wolves announce themselves with manners. A shape lower to the ground, trout-like punctuation marks, breath plumes that look like they've taken correspondence classes in etiquette. They don't rush the midden, they orbit. You do the bubble. One person stands, one feeds the brag corner of the fire, one person clicks stones to make sparks drizzle like a polite meteor. You do not throw food at fangs, you do throw voices, a growled syllable, a synchronized foot thump, the rib spoon tapping its calming metronome on the anvil. Wolves learn the boundary. You learn to make your line sound confident. The hyenas are honest thieves. They will work the downwind line until the buffet is boring, then test the margin of light with shoulder sways that read as swagger if you're new and as scent-checking if you're not. You perform the camp's toy theater. A torch raised, a coal lob into a bare patch, never at an animal. Never, just into the dark like a sunrise preview, and a bark paddle flutter that makes smoke behave like a curtain. 9 nights out of 10, distance and confidence settle it. On the 10th, you close ranks, backs to the rock, spoons to ribs, they double as clackers, and wait. The hyenas decide your reviews will be poor and go patronize the dumpster like civilized critics. You choreograph children without speeches. Small ones sit on the hide roll behind the lamp where the air is clean and the light feels like law. The turning stick is confiscated so nobody gets braver than the night deserves. Sir Spudley accepts its desk duty with admirable maturity. The ant deploys her eyebrows in 2 modes. Please nod for quiet. No nod for quieter. A nut becomes a silencer placed in a small palm. There's a reason elders lived long enough to need the ladle first. Order pays dividends in heartbeats. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. When hyena coprolites dry, they turn the color of old seashells, thanks to calcium from all that bone. A few camps, yours included, use the chalky lumps as temporary marks on stone to map the do not cross line for children during night watch. Stay behind the white stones. They stink less than they sound once the rain has had opinions. They crumble if you step on them. They write a surprisingly good circle. If you ever wondered what the Paleolithic version of a wet paint sign was, it's a ring of fossilized jokes that hyenas leave for free. Mainstream fact, tucked near the torch rack, some sites, Lazaret, Cueva Descubierta, Les Pradels, Grotte du Bison, show alternating carnivore dens and human occupations, with hyena dens rich in chewed bone and layers above or below human hearths. Elsewhere, human bone piles and hearths sit over carnivore floors. At several, coprolites and chewed ends sit within human living areas, meaning visitors arrive during or between occupations. The ground keeps score in calcium and charcoal. The wolf question earns a sidebar under the stars. A shadow sits at a respectful angle downwind, ears doing the math. You remember a scatter of canned bones in a nearby slope shelter. Long jaws, a mix of wolf and, maybe not quite wolf, morphology that kept a visiting scholar scribbling for a week. Historians still argue whether such animals were just wolves raiding refuse, early friendly wolves hovering at camp edges for bones and warmth, or very early dog-like lineages that flirted with people and then blinked out. You do not settle the debate. You toss a stone past the eyes, never at them, and the wolf blinks and says fair enough. Your fire is the negotiator. This is what keep the fire bragging means, not a bonfire that wastes wood and makes stories nervous, but a confident core with talkative edges. More flame when eyes stack at the margin, more coals when night's guests remember their other appointments. The smoke stays sheeted low across the ankle lines so fleas and midges decide to vote elsewhere. The lamp stays high on its shelf for steadiness that says, "We are awake enough to choose." Historians still argue whether Neanderthals carried torches on night forays, used firebrands specifically to defend kills, or mostly relied on group size, noise, and placement to minimize losses. Torch residues are shy in the record. Soot tells where, not how. Your camp shows off a practical repertoire. A torch when you must move, a coal rake when you must signal, a chorus when you must sound bigger than you feel. Defense without drama learns from the day's tidy habits. The downwind midden stays where you walked it. Grease is thin spread so it cools fast. Bone shafts destined for tools nap under a hide inside the light, not out where reviews are being written by other mouths. You tidy the napping floor so you're not dancing on sharps if you have to step lively. You tuck 2 tubers under ash now, insurance the night can't argue with. When nerves try to petition, you give them jobs. One person counts eyes very softly, 1, 2, leaf, 3, shadow that isn't. One person keeps the simmer cup doing tiny blips so a hot sip is ready for the elder with the cold hands. One person chants the 3-note inventory, knife, retoucher, cord, so nobody mislays their competence. Joke 2, you give the hyenas a mental Yelp page and imagine them complaining. Bones underseasoned, staff unwelcoming, would rummage again. The watch has a schedule even on quiet nights. First watch is the one who likes to think. Second is the one who can wake without snapping at the day. Third is the one who hears foxes change their minds at 50 paces. You trade watches like you trade Marrow, fairly, so sleep keeps agreeing to visit. The equal sign of bank soon gets postponed until the eyes blink out and the giggles relocate to their own den committee. Mainstream fact, lit by the lamp's small gold. Hyena dens leave cubby piles, sorted bones, chewed flakes, and coprolite carpets that differ from human middens in fragment types and breakage angles. Analysts can tell when people stepped into a hyena dress and redecorated with hearths and tools. They can also tell when hyenas repossessed a human address and rearranged it according to bone-eating priorities. Your camp occupies the space in between, not a fortress, not a buffet, a conversation with teeth that ends most nights in mutual boredom. Joke 3 shows up with the wind's last shrug. You lift a glow stick and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, last call." Somewhere in the dark a giggle answers, translated loosely as, "Fine, but your dumpster hours are inconsistent." By the time the eyes reduce to punctuation that no longer requires reading, the fire has settled into its library hum again. The torches go back to their shelf, their resin cooling into patience. Sir Spudley resumes the pose of a stick that has never had adventures. You walk the perimeter once, midden quiet, meat rail still smug, bedding waiting like a promise, and then lay the equal sign in ash across the coals. The ember purrs. The night accepts the truce. And you lie down with the particular relaxation that belongs to people who negotiated with the dark using light, order, and eyebrows, and won the simplest prize, uneventful sleep. You discover that after dinner the camp speaks a second language that never bothered to invent nouns. It's hums, eyebrows, shin tilts, rib spoon taps, a dozen hand shapes that mean closer, without saying closer, and a way of pointing that includes tomorrow. Nobody is shy, nobody is loud. Conversation arrives like steam, visible if you look, warm if you lean in, gone if you clutch at it. You settle by the coals and let your ears learn what your tongue can rest from. The first word you hear is a note. Low, sustained, due as if sung into the side of a bowl. It's not a song, it's a signal. This is safe heat. The child who owns Sir Spudley answers with 2 soft taps on the stick. Talk talk, which tonight means the tubers have behaved. A shoulder roll from the ant, the minister of drafts now moonlighting as registrar of rhythms, adds permission, proceed. You tap the ladle's scapula gently on the anvil. Talk, 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 talk. Recipe, confirmed by percussion. Joke 1, you whisper that you have finally found jazz, and the ant's eyebrow says you have finally found manners. You practice the alphabet of hands. Palm half upright with a curling finger brings somebody closer than, "Come here," ever could. Thumb and forefinger pinched, turned slowly, means slow fire, in the soupish corner. 2 fingers brushed across the lower lip asks, "Too hot?" and earns either a grin or a dramatic tongue fan. A flat hand circling above the coals says, "Bank soon," the gestural cousin of last night's equal sign in ash. You spend 10 minutes saying thank you with cheek muscles and are startled to realize it works. Here's a mainstream fact you can lay beside the fire with confidence. Neanderthals carried a hide bone, the small, floating bone that supports the tongue, shaped much like ours, famously preserved in the Cabra-2 skeleton, and their genomes include the derived FOXP2 variant seen in modern humans. Both lines of evidence consistent with a capacity for complex vocalization. Add to that inner ear studies suggesting auditory sensitivity in the speech-relevant band, and you can stop picturing a chorus of grunts. The range here likely had vowels, consonants, cadence, even if grammar preferred to walk rather than run. Still, grammar tonight is polite and optional. The camp leans on prosody, that lilt you use when you want to invite instead of order. A rising hum asks, a fallen hum thanks, a little throat click scolds the fire for trying to leap. When the child tries a big person hum, it comes out like a goose attempting French. The camp smiles with their eyes and replies with a good try, cadence you recognize from kitchens with aprons and degrees. Joke 2, you offer your own hum and it sounds like a bear reading a recipe. The child promotes you to backup kettle. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals wielded fully syntactic language, subject-verb-object baggage and tenses you can get wrong, or a proto-language dense with meaningful sounds, gestures, and shared routines, enough to coordinate hunts, teach toolmaking, and negotiate bedtime without losing anyone to adverbs. The bones and genes nod towards speech ability. The archaeological stage directions, teaching scars on tools, repeated hearth placement, shared recipes, prove coordination. The middle answer you can sleep on, whatever they spoke, it was effective. Watch a lesson unfold without a single therefore. A teen sits with a flake and a retoucher, the edge dull in exactly the way beginners gravitate toward. The ant leans over and breathes the rhythm, hum, 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 each hum matching the pressure of a push. She shapes the teen's elbow with the back of her fingers, a ghost touch that says, "Anchor here." She rocks her wrist and the teen mirrors. The flake catches light evenly. 2 taps on the rib spoon mean, "Good." If you asked what was said, you would say nothing and be wrong. You begin to catch the camp code for food. 1 tap on the anvil, fat is ready. 2 taps, roots can turn. 3 soft clicks, flint on flint, announces, "Don't rush," because the bitter batch is still being ash peeled. The code is not universal, it's local dialect, as portable as a pouch and as adaptable as weather. Quirky tidbit for your pocket, this camp has a quiet alarm, a hollow bone laid across a shallow pit. A gentle to-talk on it travels through the ground as much as the air, a polite nudge that says, "Eyes to the door," without upstaging the night. Your own face gets recruited. You learn to make the "I am fine" mouth, a tiny sideways smile, half breath out, so the ant doesn't waste soupish on a full belly. You practice the "I am listening" eyes, brows up a whisper, head still, so the teen can perform their retouch without acquiring an audience they didn't ask for. You test drive the "No, you first" fingers palm out, 2 fingers offered, slight tilt, and receive the "Thank you, but we share" answer palm down, same 2 fingers, return tilt. You realize modern etiquette cards have nothing on Cole's side choreography.it isn't all mime. There are syllables that function like tools. Ka is what you use to cut someone's hurry. Ta is the tap word you pair with the ladle to spread seconds without narrative. A soft plus chin to the left means downwind, and everyone understands that isn't geography so much as policy. The teen trying to be grown drops a ha with an upward lilt that might mean again or am I close? Depending on the ant's it becomes one or the other, because meaning vows to marry context here and refuses to elope with dictionary. Another mainstream fact. While your ears are awake, many Neanderthals show right-handedness in the tiny striations on their incisors, likely from gripping meat or plant fibers and slicing toward the mouth, suggesting brain lateralization akin to ours, a pattern often associated, cautiously, with language specialization. Add evidence of pigment use, eagle talon ornaments, and structured spaces, like the Bruniqual stalagmite constructions, and you meet minds that like pattern enough to make signal. The drumstick shows up, not a drum, exactly, but a rib that has decided to apply for music. Someone taps the hide bundle that pretends to be a cat, thump thump, and a second rib answers with THMP, lower, slower. They are not performing, they are calibrating. When the camp walks in the morning, the footfall will unconsciously fit this metronome. When someone carries news from the berry slope, the rib will set the pace that keeps words from tripping. Is that art? Is that logistics? You shrug. Around here the 2 hold hands without asking permission. You wonder what arguing looks like when grammar is decorative. Turns out it looks like breathing. A long inhale that lifts the shoulders says, "Wait." A held exhale with a head tilt says, "I heard you, not yet." If someone forgets themselves and clacks flint because their idea is shiny, the ant answers with the hum that lowers weather, on the exhale, and the clacking dies like rain that understood it had the wrong day. Joke 3. You attempt the lowering hum and discover you've invented sleep for 2 seconds. Historians still argue whether meaningful silence, shared attention, joint action, teaching by demonstration, can get you all the way to culture without formal syntax. The hearth replies with facts you can taste, boiled roots that change their minds about bitterness, a retouched scraper that remembers to shine evenly, a child who knows where to sit when eyes appear at the edge of the dark. If that isn't culture, the word needs more soupish. You try the recipe game the camp plays for new people. The ant opens both hands palm up, closes them, turns them, blows a small breath, then wipes one palm on her thigh. Translate, says her eyebrow. You think, dig, peel, turn, cool, wipe, grit. She nods. She answers with pinch, drop, stir, marrow into tuber, then a two-finger flick at the ash corner, salt ash, and a tap on the rib spoon. Now. In less than 5 seconds you have swapped more method than a page of measurements would hold. When it's time to close the room, the ant doesn't announce a meeting. She simply tilts the ladle on its stone so its shadow points at the ankle corner. People drift. The child lays Sir Spudley across the hearth with ceremony and no audience. Someone sings 2 notes that are really breaths. You catch yourself translating them as enough and good. The ember likes the sound of that as much as you do. Before you sleep, you test your new vocabulary. Palm out. I'll take first watch. 2 fingers to chest, 1 to the door. Wake me if the wind changes. A little dew hum over the ember. Steady. In reply, the ant sketches the equal sign in ash and rests the rib spoon on the anvil so it can dream about tempo. No verdicts tonight on how many words you need to live well. The only ruling is practical, enough to share fat, enough to teach edges, enough to point a child toward sleep. You lie down inside a conversation you now feel fluent in, at least at the courtesy level. The cave speaks in drafts and glows. The camp replies with hands and taps. Your body, which has held on to too many paragraphs for too many years, chooses to trust cadence instead. The last thing you hear is the ant's at a pitch you didn't know you recognized. The one that means tomorrow will start with steam and agreement. You agree in advance. You realize, somewhere between the last ladle scrape and the first star, that dinner has doors. Not the cave mouth, the social doors that swing open when news arrives in a palm, a red ochre nub rubbed smooth as soap, a shell that used to know tides, a flint core that doesn't belong to this valley's geology. These are not decorations for a mantle you don't own, they're invitations. You place such a thing on the anvil the way you might set down a loaf back home. The room understands, guests will be along, or you are the guest. The shell shows first. It's pale and bored of the ocean, edges worn so evenly you can tell it has been held more than once. Someone rolls it across the firelight, and the lamp catches a dust of red inside like a sunset that forgot to end. It makes a gentle clack on the anvil, and somehow the sound says far and friendly at the same time. The ant, registrar of rhythms, minister of drafts, general ambassador, tilts her head. That shell is not from this river, not from the next. It came in a pocket that came in a story that will arrive in feet. Mainstream fact, warm as the coals, Neanderthal contexts in Europe and Western Asia have yielded red and yellow ochres with grinding facets, manganese dioxide lumps carried and scraped, bird talons fashioned or strung, as at Krapina, and even pierced shells with pigment traces, famously at caves on the Iberian coast. Plus lithics whose raw materials traveled dozens of kilometers from their sources. None of this reads like random drift. It reads like materials with meaning moving across people with paths. You make room by the fire and dust the anvil with your palm as if sweeping crumbs, because certain objects deserve stagecraft. The shell sits there like a polite bell. When a figure appears at the edge of light, broad shoulders, bundled like a small hill, no one is surprised. The visitor places a flint core on the stone, dark, fine-grained, not your valley's chalk-born stuff. A second core answers from your pouch, paler, sparkier, a ridge-lined stone that loves to flake. No speeches. The cores lean against each other like tired relatives, and the air knows what the people will do: eat, talk, and swap future edges. You pass a bowl, and with it a color. A thumb of ochre, soft clay, iron's warm whisper, goes across your fingertips and into the shell. You add fat until it glosses. Your aunt stirs with the rib spoon as if she were tasting soupish. She draws a line across the shell's inside, a dot on its lip, and then 3 tidy smears on the back of her hand. The guest smiles with their eyes and dusts manganese black into the same bowl, stirring until it darkens like wet stone. Joke 1. You mutter that you've invented makeup. The aunt replies that you've invented manners, guest color for guest night. Historians still argue whether these pigments live mostly in the world of art and symbol, body marks, object staining, decor, or whether they also serve the workbench, hide tanning, adhesive temper, even a pinch of manganese to help coals behave. The lumps under your lamp refuse to choose. They do both as needed. Tonight they are announcements painted small, a dot on a wrist that says, "I came from Sierre," a streak on a brow that says, "I walked Ridgestone," a smear on Sir Spudley that says, "You will not be mistaken in the morning." Gifts follow the clockwise habit you love. The visitor's pouch produces pearls of resin wrapped in leaf, the glues that make hafting less prayerful. Your bundle answers with a retoucher whose antler has learned exactly the right spring. The teen who has been learning pressure flaking watches like a fox at a threshing floor. If anyone were counting value, they'd miss the point. These swaps are recipes by other names. Quirky tidbit to slip in your pouch. Someone ties a tiny knot in a new cord, then another, 3 warmed, thumb-sized knobs that make the cord pleasant to handle. The visitor laughs softly and answers with 4 on theirs. The knots aren't writing, they are memory beads for the hands, a way to count days until a return or mark how many shells went where. Later you'll find cords like this smoothed along the bumps from habit alone. Touch polish as a diary entry. The flints get tested on the spot. You brace a core on the anvil, turn it like a star chart, and strike. The Levallois plan you both know. Shape the core's convex language, set platforms, rotate the universe. Gives up a broad flake that shines like intention. The visitor laughs the you've come to recognize as applause. They do the same to your pale core. The flake falls with that crisp tack that promises tough edges for days. Somewhere, miles away, a quarry has been thanked without knowing it. You keep the food moving because conversation is easier for mouths that know rest. The visitor learns your saltash trick and gifts a leaf that, when crushed, wakes soup like a rumor of summer even in stingy months. You show them ash peel clay on a stubborn tuber. They show you a bark cone you can set near coals to drip fat into a shell without drama. Joke 2. You propose opening a chain of caves called The Exchange. Your aunt decrees the first rule. All recipes are sideways. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal exchange was formal trade, agreements, expectations, structured reciprocity, or mostly down-the-line movement, a thing passed and passed again as groups intersected, like gossip with better manners. Raw material studies show sources 20, 40, sometimes 80 kilometers away. Some shells wandered far from coasts. Pigments turned up where no outcrop existed. The record doesn't write contracts, it maps paths. You learn the shape of hospitality that objects enforce. A shell on the anvil means, "Sit, tell me where this has been." A flint core means, "Our edges can be kin." A feather, "Yes, there's one tonight, black and glossy," means, "I had time to notice beauty and safety at the same moment." You remember the eagle talon bracelet scholars whisper about, and realize you don't need a parade to understand adornment. The lamp paints a soft line of red on a wrist, and the wrist looks like it belongs in the room. Someone mentions the ridged path with 3 finger dips toward the west, the place where honey sometimes negotiates with hands. The visitor's chin tilt says next moon. and your aunt's eyebrow says bring bark cups. You can feel the network knitting itself across valleys, and understanding that smoke at a certain bend means company, that a red mark on a rock by the ford means safe to cross, or possibly don't bother, go upstream, depending on the angle, that a shell clack at twilight means we come with stories and not with teeth. You add a little ceremony because sleep loves predictable beauty. The visitor sets their shell upright on the anvil. You set your stone cup beside it. A line of red goes inside the shell. A line of melted fat goes inside the cup. You tilt each toward the other until they almost meet and then pull them back. Hello, hello. And it's absurd that such a small gesture could feel like peace. But look around. No one laughs at it. The room widens. Mainstream fact. Another log for your confidence. Lithic sourcing shows some Neanderthal groups moved raw materials by embedded procurement, picking up stone while pursuing other goals, and some by targeted forays, going to a source on purpose while, down the line, exchange spreads. Exotic pieces across multiple sites. Pigment use clusters in some regions and trickles in others, suggesting traditions as much as necessity. Shells in inland sites often show wear and pigment, not just dietary signatures, hinting at symbol. The visitor begins a leaving ritual you haven't seen yet. They tap the anvil twice with the butt of a flaker, then touch the shell, then your retoucher. Talk, touch, and wait. The ant answers. Ladle tilt, =sign ash over a small, new ember conjured from the main bed and banked in its own nest. A traveling heart, tucked in bark, is pressed into the visitor's palm. For the slow fox, the ant says without needing to say it, and the visitor's eyes agree to carry light until a new hearth learns their name. Joke 3 follows the ember. You present the visitor with Sir Spudley for inspection, extolling its virtues as turner, pointer, and diplomatic wand. The visitor gravely awards your stick a stripe of red ochre near the handle, rank, perhaps, or just an itinerary, and returns it. Sir Spudley looks so proud you're afraid it will ask for a raise. When the guest is gone, footsteps turning to dots in soft soil, the gifts remain like instructions written in objects. The dark core will cut roots as if they asked nicely. The resin will make a half-tell truth. The shell, cleaned, will keep fat or color or stones meant to become stories. You add one more line in red on the doorstone, not to own the night but to remember it. Company came. We answered. The paths are awake. Historians still argue whether these exchanges built long alliances, names, familiar faces across seasons, or whether they were short, bright stitches that held just long enough to trade flint and news. The hearth suggests a third option, habits that outlive names. Put the shell down. Warm the fat. Mark the wrist. Bank a coal for someone else. Objects as verbs, not nouns. Gifts as methods that keep dinner generous and distance smaller than the map admits. You fall asleep with the shell's clack still in your ear and a faint red along your thumb from stirring guest color. In the dark, the cave smells the same as always, smoke, stone, a hairline of fat. But the air feels larger, as if it knows it could walk, and would be welcomed, beyond this valley. The ember purrs under its ash blanket. Sir Spudley rests with a new stripe. The anvil remembers two cores shaking hands. Tomorrow you'll wake to the same roots and the same ladle. But tonight the fire has learned a new name for far, and far, politely, has learned a new name for home. You stand, belly calm and fingers still a little glossy, and you feel the room switch from eating to keeping. Dinner always has a tail. It curls into cleanup with the same quiet competence as the ladle's tilt. The hearth exhales. You answer with the camp's favorite punctuation. 2 equal sign strokes of ash across the coals that mean, bank soon, but not finished. Sir Spudley, off duty as turning stick, is rehired as usher. You lay it across the rim to remind wandering hands which side is hot gossip and which side is tomorrow. First job, ash blankets. You rake the pale powder you've been saving from the clean burned corner, and sift it over the coals until the hearth looks like winter learned to whisper. The blanket smothers sparkly ambition, keeps the ember purring, and leaves the air smelling like tidy, a dry, mineral hush that says a room can be clean without ever having met a broom closet. You pinch a thin line of ash along the doorstone too, the camp's version of a doormat. If paws cross it uninvited, they leave truth behind. The floor gets combed with a bundle of twig brush you tied last week. 3 clutching fists of scrub push just enough to gather crumbs and chips toward the same corner every night. The corner is a map, light stuff in front, peels, tired leaves, shiny stuff behind, micro flakes for tomorrow's edge rescue, and grease nowhere because you won't teach the floor that bad habit. Joke 1, you dub the brush the minister of crumbs, and it accepts the portfolio by refusing to shed twigs on the job. Bones tell you where they want to go. The shaft fragments you meant to save for skewers, wedge shims, and grease lamps stay inside the circle, tucked under a hide so nobody's heel donates blood to archaeology. The empty epiphyses, marrow gone, pride not, get walked to the downwind midden, the buffet you manage so hyenas don't mistake the table for the kitchen. You toss them thin and wide so they cool fast and don't write a smoke signal you didn't intend. The nut shells and stubborn peels follow, but the ash peel clay shells from the bitter roots? Those get broken and scattered. No child needs to rediscover your experiment with their toes. Mainstream fact to set beside the doorstone. Geoarchaeologists reading Neanderthal living floors often find distinct lenses of ash and charcoal, swept zones, and midden patches placed downwind or downslope, plus microdebitage, rains of tiny flint chips concentrated near work spots. Patterns that fit cleanup and spatial organization, not random drift. Repeated hearths stack like pages. Swept areas read as habits, a daily choreography that outlives names. You wash without a river. Sand goes in the stone cup, a spoon of warm water follows. Your fingers circle until the grit turns into a loyal dish rag. The cup shines again with that use polish museums are so fond of, and your hands go from glossy to squeak. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. A pinch of wood ash rubbed with water on greasy hands acts like a primitive lye, just enough alkali to cut fat, so the smell of marrow becomes the smell of done. You can feel the squeaks set in. The ant nods without looking, which is how you know you've graduated from student to sink. You sift fine ash over the sleeping mats and let it sit while you deal with the rest. Ash drinks damp, frowns at mites, and then shakes out the door as if it had a day job and laundry. The hide bundle that pretends to be a cat gets hung on the smoke rail for a minute to remind small things with too many legs about jurisdiction. The horn cup and rib spoon get a sand swirl, a grass wipe, and a minute by the simmer ledge to dry. No one wants tomorrow's breakfast flavored yesterday. Historians still argue whether tidy floors and neat hearth edges reflect intentional housekeeping, sweeping, recentering fires, designated trash zones, or whether the palimpsest of trampling, wind, and reuse creates illusory order after the fact. They also debate whether hearth relocations mark draft chasing, seasonal redecoration, or simply fresh, clean surfaces for the next round. Your hands discover the middle position, again. We sweep because it works. We move the fire when the wind forgets its manners. You mark tomorrow before you mark sleep. If the draft holds, you build a hearth nest just to the side, a ring of 3 stones you've learned, over weeks, are honest, one that holds heat, one that likes flame, one that behaves when wet. In the center you lay a bark cup packed with punkwood ember from tonight's heart, snuffed under a tight ash cap so it can wake at first light. If the wind sulks or the mosquito policy needs redrafting, you chalk the new spot with a char line on the floor and set a token cold air so the cave can start thinking in the right direction while you sleep. The doorstone gets its memo. A char arrow, small, polite, points downwind toward the midden so no one wanders barefoot into hyena reviews. 2 white coprolite pebbles, hyena chalk from last night's perimeter game, mark the "Stop small feet here" line. You laugh softly at the idea that your most dignified signage is written in ash, char, and old jokes. But this is the Paleolithic. Stationary is what the day gives you. Inside, you return objects to addresses. Retoucher in the repair roll, flake in the bark sheath that smells like resin and home, cordage around the short stick with the 2-knot code, 1 for eat now, 2 for fix first. You touch each on the ant's 3-note inventory, knife, retoucher, cord, and the room answers with a quiet present. Joke 2, you promote the rib spoon to supervisor of found things. And it takes the job by resting where everyone expects it. The outside gets a minute. You step to the midden and listen. When it's content, no flies, no giggles too close, you brush a little ash veil over today's top layer, a form of humility for leftovers that also keeps sense from writing a novel. The meat rail earns a last check. You pinch off any drip before it makes a trail for noses you'd rather not employ. The water place, the trickle where you rinse, receives a respectful note tonight. Peels and ash do not travel upstream. Tomorrow, the current can meet leached acorns. Tonight, it keeps its privacy. Mainstream fact, another steady ember. Some Neanderthal sites show repeated bedding areas with traces of reeds and herb phytoliths, hearths just in front, and trash further away. Others reveal hearth rakeout deposits, ash dumped to the side, and edge maintenance that suggests people curated their living space. Microstratigraphy, thin sections slices of floor, record sweep marks, ash dumps, and trampled laminations that look suspiciously like chores. You set 2 ash-baked tubers in their morning cradles, tucked where heat stays like a memory but won't rehearse all night. You collect the bone flakes that could turn into teeth trouble and stack them by the anvil with the oops soup pieces from earlier. Even the failures deserve a pile. You kick a careless spark into obedience and realize your feet have learned to be janitors. They nudge, they brush, they hold still and let the twig brush do its lecture. Historians still argue whether latrine habits sat on a chart in anyone's head, downstream and downwind, never near sleep, or whether trial, error, and noses did the scheduling. They further debate how often fires were deliberately raked out and moved to a fresh patch to reduce smoke and improve draft versus the number of times rain, rockfall, or visitors with teeth forced the remodel. You won't resolve it tonight. You will put distance between food, sleep, trash, and river, and let future arguments warm themselves on your patterns. Back at the hearth, the ash blanket has settled into that gentle convexity Anne likes. No hot freckles escaping, no sulking. She draws the equal sign again, a signature more than an instruction, and rests the ladle on its stone with the handle pointing toward dawn. You draw a tiny red dot, guessed pigment left in the shell, near the new hearth nest, your private, remember, and rub the rest into your palm so it leaves as clean as it arrived. Joke 3 ambles in with your yawn. You announce the cave is now closed for renovations. And the fire, which appreciates good signage, declines to argue by not popping when you turn your back. By the time you lie down, the room looks like decision rather than accident. Ash where ash belongs, bones where bones can do no harm, tools and addresses that will still be correct in the dark. The midden hums faintly downwind like a restaurant you don't need to visit. The meat rail glows with quiet opinion, and the hearth nest waits with a slow fox in its bark cradle, ready to be adopted by morning. You smell clean smoke stone, a shadow of marrow that has learned to mind its business. The last thing you do, because the minister of drafts trained you that way, is listen for the breathing place, the draft that says the room will do its part while you do yours. Nothing grand, nothing heroic. Just keeping, the art of making sure tomorrow doesn't trip over today. You bank the ember under its ash blanket, rest Sir Spudley at parade rest, and agree with the ladle's handle about which way is east. The cave approves by getting quieter without becoming empty. You approve by letting your eyes close in a room that has already done half of morning's work. You feel the evening fold itself smaller, like a blanket learning corners. The camp has eaten, traded colors, cleaned the floor into a quiet promise, and now the fire asks its favorite question, how little is enough to see us through the dark? You answer with 2 strokes of ash, the equal sign you've learned to write without thinking, soft, level, not scolding. The coals glow like a row of sleepy eyes, then dim to that cherry pulse that means present, not performing. This is the hour when voices lose nouns and keep only kindness. Someone hums the do that certifies safety. Someone else answers with the little click that means door watched. The ant, minister of drafts, registrar of rhythms, patron saint of eyebrows, circles the hearth once more with a rib fan to lay a thin sheet of smoke across the ankle line for late biters, then taps Sir Spudley against the rim and retires the stick to its crosswise post. Joke 1. You salute the stick as night watchman emeritus. It pretends not to enjoy the title. You practice the ritual that makes morning easy. From the heart of the coals you pinch a single ember with the antler tine, set it in a bark scallop cushioned by ash, and cap it with another bark curl, leaving the tiniest breathing slit a fox could squeeze a whisper through. The packet slides into the hearth nest you prepared, a 3-stone cradle, where it will purr in secret until dawn asks for coffee it has never heard of. A second ember, the backup fox, tucks into a punkwood cake near the repair roll, because redundancy is the camp's favorite superstition. Mainstream fact you can bank with the coals. At Neanderthal sites like El Salt, Spain, microstratigraphy reveals repeated ash layers with plant phytoliths from grasses and herbs mixed into bedding and raked out hearth waste, consistent with deliberate banking, sweeping, and maintenance. Ash underlaid to freshen sleeping areas and to keep pests modest, and hearths used over and over in the same sweet draft spots. The floors remember habits, not accidents. Sleeping places bloom out of ordinary ground with a few folds and nudges. Reed mats shake free their ash and arrange themselves into shallow nests. Hides unroll to become cats again. The lamp on the shelf gets one last Marrow sip, a circle of gold barely bigger than a coin. You watch addresses become beds, elders by the warm wall, children tucked where lamplight can find them but smoke cannot, the watch near the doorstone with the torches within reach and the cool breath of the cave in their lungs. If a child dreams badly, the ladle's handle points toward the comfort. Everyone can find it in the dark without asking the air for directions. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals slept in segmented shifts with formal sentinels, as some modern foragers often do, or relied mostly on fire placement, cave geometry, and group nearness to reduce risk, waking in waves because infants, weather, and ribs insist, not because a schedule said so. They also argue whether bedding, grasses, conifers, herb sprigs, was routine furniture or opportunistic luxury. The layers whisper pattern. The debates will be here after your eyes close. You adopt the camp's bedtime engineering. A handful of fine ash gets rubbed into the door mat line to crisp any incoming paw prints into confession. A char smear marks the new draft if the wind has altered its manners since dusk. The simmer cup is emptied, sand swirled, and tipped to dry on its edge so the morning doesn't taste like yesterday. 2 ash-baked tubers nestle their shoulders into a warm pocket where the ember thinks but doesn't talk. The bone pick goes back to its cave under the anvil lip. The room becomes a diagram you could navigate with elbows. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. The ant snips 2 thumb-length spruce tips and tucks them into a corner of the bedding. Conifers share a quiet superpower. Resins that frown at fleas and perfume dreams like cold sunlight. A second little trick you won't forget. A warm stone wrapped in hide, set by feet that argue with weather. primitive hot water bottle that thinks it's older than time and does not correct you when you call it luxury. Joke 2 arrives with the stone. You thank your prehistoric mattress heater, and it replies by not rolling away exactly when your toes introduce themselves. Night sounds practice their scales. The stream edits itself into a kinder draft. A raven clicks a last editorial. Far downwind the midden hosts a review panel with hyenas chairing and nobody writing minutes. The watch murmurs the 3-item roll call: knife, retoucher, cord, as if inventory were a lullaby. The child who ran turning for the tubers now runs sleep by placing their very small hand on the ant's wrist until breaths sink, then rolls slides toward their own nest. It's not that danger has left, it's that maintenance has convinced danger to try later. You tuck your head into the place where hide meets grass seam and inhale clean smoke, stone, and the honest kitchen after smell of marrow that has remembered to be subtle. Your spine remembers the day, the anvil's thock, the digging stick's polite argument with the root, the soft metronome of the rib on hide. Your hands, finally unbusy, keep the shape of tools for a breath or two and then forget in the only direction that feels like wisdom. Historians still argue whether fire burned all night, tended by people who learned to sleep with one ear on draft, or whether camps often let the heart die after banking, trusting the ember foxes to keep tomorrow inside today. Some hearth stacks show all-night growth, others show daily pulses, bright use, banked rest, bright again. Your nest takes the middle path, coals that purr, flame that rests, a watch that watches more by habit than by alarm. You let the story shrink until it fits on the back of your eyelids. There is always one last tale told at library volume. Tonight it's about a badger who borrowed a digging stick and returned it a day later sharpened where it didn't need to be. Laughter arrives as nose breath and shoulders shake. The lamp agrees it has heard worse and does a tiny flicker that passes for applause. The tale ends without a moral because the coals have started telling their own. Be small, be warm, be ready. The ember fox in the bark scallop gets a final inspection, a lean of the head, a thumb of ash. The ant draws the equal sign a last time as if to underline the day. The watch settles on the doorstone and smudges a fingertip of fat on the torch for easy waking. The air near the ceiling unwrinkles. Your hearing retunes to the cave's breathing place. That gentle pull that means the smoke will go where it needs to without doing theater in your lungs. Joke 3 sidles in. You whisper to the ember, "Try not to dream of wind." And the ember replies by doing the most obedient thing it knows. Glow less. Point one more fact to tuck under your pillow with the warm stone. Excavations at a few Middle Paleolithic shelters have found thin bedding lenses, reeds and leaves, set over ash with little hearths nearby and trash carefully away, repeating across layers. In some, herb traces hint at plants chosen for scent or insects, and the microdebitage fields stop just short of the sleeping zone. It reads like a floor plan that learned good manners. Work here, rest here, ember there, tomorrow preloaded. The last sounds mean permission, a ladle handle kissing its stone, a cord settling in its loop with a small fibrous sigh, a breath that decides it can be longer now. You lie on your side facing the ember because everyone does. It's less a superstition than an agreement with comfort. Your eyes do the slow blink that invites dreams. The cave answers by lowering the room's punctuation from sentences to commas to ellipses. If you wake in the ink between hours, there will be a tiny job waiting. Touch the scallop, listen to the draft, nudge the sheet of smoke back across your ankles in case some late mosquito wants to argue policy. If you do not wake, it's because you're keeping worked and the camp allowed sleep to do what it always wanted to do: repair, erase, fold, and write tomorrow into your bones without demanding that you remember how. The ember, tucked under ash, keeps its small vow. The watch counts stars and runs out of numbers. Outside, the hill files its reports with the wind. Inside, you fall the brief, productive distance from story to yawn, and then to nothing that worries you. The fox in bark glows once. like a wink you'll never quite be sure you saw, and then remains the exact shade of ready. Wind down the room quiets until even the coals seem to breathe in longer lines, and you let your own breath match theirs, out, in, the way smoke learns a doorway. The day's small triumphs, one clean strike on a stubborn bone, a tuber that finally turned sweet, the polite drum of a rib on hide, drift to the edge like boats, moored for morning. You can still taste the soft echo of fat and ash salt, still feel the shy heat where a warmed stone rests by your feet. But everything loud has been folded and put away. The anvil's thok, the hyena's punctuation, the laughter that shook its head and chose to be kind. You lie on your side facing the ember fox in its bark cradle, that tiny heartbeat under ash that promises a stove you don't have to invent again. Sir Spudley naps at parade rest. The ladle points its handle toward a small idea of dawn. The minister of drafts, off duty at last, has left the air tuned to a key you can sleep in. Somewhere beyond the doorstone, water remembers alleged likes and rehearses the same calm syllable again and again until it becomes a lullaby without words. If worry tries to creep in, the room answers with simple math you've learned to trust: fat and starch and bright, ash and order and fairness, smoke where pests breathe and clean air where your nose lives. A cord around a short stick, a retoucher that knows its job, a habit of putting the good thing into small hands first. Nothing in this cave hurries, and therefore nothing important is late. You feel the draft's soft hand pass over your ankles, the bedding's faint resin, the stone's patient cool. The ember fox winks, once, and chooses to glow less. You follow its example. Shoulder eases, jaw loosens, eyes half close, then close. The cave keeps watch. The coals keep time. The night does what it has done forever, holds you gently while your bones write tomorrow in a language older than memory.